The First Legion stands as both triumph and tragedy in the annals of the Imperium, their genesis marking the dawn of the Adeptus Astartes, yet their legacy forever tainted by secrets that would consume them across 10 millennia. Created in the laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains on Terra during the late 30th millennium, the Dark Angels emerged as the Emperor's prototype warriors, the first successful attempt at crafting superhuman soldiers from the genetic template of the Primarchs. While their gene sire remained lost among the scattered sons of the Master of Mankind, these early Space Marines bore the genetic markers of what would later be identified as the first Primarch's legacy. The Unification Wars provided the crucible in which these nascent warriors would prove their worth. Terra's fractured landscape, scarred by millennia of atomic warfare and techno-barbarian kingdoms, demanded soldiers capable of operating in the most hostile environments imaginable. The Proto-Dark Angels excelled in these conditions, their enhanced physiology allowing them to fight effectively in irradiated wastelands where unaugmented humans would perish within hours. Their early engagements against the Pan-Pacific Empire's gene-crafted horrors and the Ursh Dominion's psycho-indoctrinated legions demonstrated tactical flexibility that would become their hallmark. During these formative campaigns, the First Legion developed operational doctrines that emphasized adaptability and comprehensive warfare. Unlike the more specialized approaches that would later define other legions, the Dark Angels became masters of combined arms tactics, equally capable of void warfare, planetary assault, siege operations, and guerrilla campaigns. Their ability to seamlessly transition between different combat roles made them invaluable to the Emperor's expanding war machine. The Legion's early commanders, drawn from Terra's finest military minds and enhanced through the arduous process of Space Marine creation, established training regimens that pushed recruits beyond conventional limits. The recruitment pools for the First Legion initially drew from Terra's surviving warrior cultures, particularly those regions that had maintained martial traditions despite the planet's devastation. These early Dark Angels brought with them concepts of honor, duty, and brotherhood that would later resonate strongly with Calibanite knightly culture. The Legion's structure reflected this heritage, with companies organized along lines that emphasized personal bonds between battle brothers while maintaining strict hierarchical discipline. Each warrior understood his place within the greater whole, yet possessed the initiative to act independently when circumstances demanded. As the Great Crusade's planning phases began, the First Legion had already established itself as the Emperor's most reliable instrument of war. Their combat record during the final stages of Terran unification spoke to their effectiveness, but more importantly, their absolute loyalty to the Master of Mankind had been tested and proven in the crucible of battle. The Emperor entrusted them with knowledge and responsibilities that other legions would never receive, beginning a pattern of secrecy that would define their character for millennia to come. The discovery of Lion El'Jonson on Caliban marked a fundamental transformation in the Legion's identity and purpose. The world itself presented a stark contrast to Terra's ravaged surface, a feudal realm where knightly orders maintained civilization against the constant threat of chaos-tainted beasts lurking in the planet's vast forests. Caliban's society had evolved along medieval lines, with fortified monasteries serving as centers of learning and martial training. The planet's unique position, unknowingly situated near a significant warp anomaly, had attracted creatures of the Immaterium for millennia, creating a perpetual state of warfare that forged its inhabitants into exceptional warriors. The young Primarch's emergence from Caliban's forests read like something from ancient Terran legends. Found as an infant by the Knights of the Order, the most prestigious of Caliban's knightly brotherhoods, he was raised within their fortress monastery and trained in their traditions of combat, honor, and duty. Luther, the Order's most accomplished knight and the closest thing to a father figure the Primarch would know, became instrumental in shaping Lion El'Jonson's early development. Under Luther's tutelage, the future Lord of the First Legion mastered not only the arts of war, but also the complex codes of chivalry that governed Calibanite society. The Order itself represented the pinnacle of Caliban's martial culture. Its knights underwent rigorous training that combined physical conditioning weapons mastery, tactical education, and spiritual discipline. The fortress monastery where they trained contained libraries preserving ancient knowledge, workshops where master artificers crafted weapons and armor, and training grounds where aspirants proved their worth through combat trials. The Order's heraldry, the winged sword that would later influence Dark Angel's iconography, symbolized their dual nature as both earthbound warriors and spiritual guardians reaching toward higher purposes. Lion El'Jonson's integration into this culture proved seamless, his superhuman capabilities allowing him to excel beyond even the Order's highest expectations. His tactical genius manifested early as he developed new strategies for combating the forest's monstrous inhabitants. Where previous generations of knights had fought defensive campaigns, content to protect their settlements and monasteries, the Primarch envisioned aggressive expeditions that would cleanse entire regions of corruption. His charismatic leadership inspired knights to follow him into battles they would never have contemplated under other commanders. The transformation of Caliban under Lion El'Jonson's leadership demonstrated the Primarch's capacity for strategic thinking on a planetary scale. Rather than simply leading the Order to greater victories, he orchestrated a campaign of unification that brought the planet's scattered knightly orders under a single banner. This process required not only military conquest, but also diplomatic skill, as he negotiated alliances with orders that had maintained independence for centuries. The Primarch's ability to understand and work within Caliban's cultural framework while gradually reshaping it according to his vision showcased the political acumen that would later serve him during the Great Crusade. When the Emperor finally arrived on Caliban, he found a world transformed. The great forest that had harbored chaos beasts for millennia had been systematically cleansed, their dark groves replaced by ordered settlements and training grounds. The planet's knightly orders had evolved into a unified military force capable of projecting power across entire continents. Most significantly, Lion El'Jonson had proven himself not merely as a warrior, but as a leader capable of inspiring absolute loyalty among his followers. Luther and the other Calibanite knights who had fought alongside the Primarch viewed him with a devotion that bordered on worship, seeing in him the fulfillment of their highest ideals. The integration of Caliban's knightly culture with the existing Dark Angel's legion created a unique hybrid that drew strength from both traditions. Terran-born Dark Angels brought technical expertise, void warfare experience, and knowledge of the broader galaxy, while Calibanite recruits contributed their planet's martial traditions, unwavering loyalty, and spiritual discipline. The recruitment practices established during this period would define the Legion for centuries to come, as Caliban became the primary source of new battle brothers. The selection process for Calibanite recruits differed significantly from standard Astartes recruitment protocols. Rather than simply testing physical capabilities and genetic compatibility, candidates underwent trials that evaluated their adherence to knightly virtues. Honor, courage, loyalty, and spiritual strength carried equal weight with martial prowess and tactical acumen. The fortress monasteries scattered across Caliban served as recruitment centers, each maintaining its own traditions while adhering to Legion-wide standards. Young aspirants who showed promise were taken from their families and inducted into a brotherhood that transcended their original knightly orders. The transformation process itself reflected this cultural synthesis. While the biological augmentation remained consistent with other legions, the psychological conditioning incorporated elements of Calibanite knightly tradition. New Dark Angels learned not only the tactical doctrines and combat techniques of the Adeptus Astartes, but also the codes of honor that had governed their homeworld for generations. This dual heritage created warriors who possessed both the tactical flexibility valued by their Terran brothers and the unwavering moral certainty that characterized Caliban's finest knights. Under Lion El'Jonson's leadership, the Dark Angels Legion embarked upon some of the Great Crusade's most challenging campaigns. Their reputation as the Emperor's most trusted legion grew with each victory, as they consistently delivered success in situations where other forces might have faltered. The Primarch's tactical genius proved particularly effective in complex multi-theater operations, where his ability to coordinate diverse forces and adapt to changing circumstances gave Imperial forces decisive advantages. The Legion's operational methods during this period emphasized thorough preparation and overwhelming application of force. Dark Angel's commanders studied their opponents extensively, gathering intelligence through reconnaissance forces and local contacts before committing to major engagements. When they did strike, their attacks combined precision and brutality in ways that quickly broke enemy resistance. The Legion's diverse capabilities allowed them to adapt their approach to each situation, whether facing technologically advanced human civilizations, Xenos empires, or chaos-corrupted worlds that required complete purification. Their reputation for secrecy also began to solidify during these early campaigns. The Dark Angels developed a practice of compartmentalizing information, ensuring that only those with absolute need to know received access to sensitive intelligence. This approach proved particularly valuable when dealing with chaos-tainted enemies, as it prevented corruption from spreading through Imperial forces. The Legion's chaplains and librarians worked closely together to identify and eliminate any signs of spiritual contamination, establishing protocols that would later prove prophetic in their importance. The Emperor's trust in the First Legion manifested in assignments that other forces never received. They spearheaded campaigns against enemies whose very existence required secrecy, eliminated threats that could not be acknowledged in official records, and secured artifacts whose nature demanded absolute discretion. This pattern of special missions reinforced the Legion's sense of being apart from their brother legions, chosen for responsibilities that required not only martial excellence, but also unquestioning loyalty to the Imperial cause. The world that would become the Dark Angel's homeworld possessed a beauty that masked profound corruption, its verdant forests and gleaming fortresses concealing ancient evils that had festered for millennia. Caliban's position in the galaxy placed it dangerously close to several warp anomalies, creating a nexus where the material realm and the immaterium intersected in ways that defied conventional understanding. The planet's original colonists, arriving during humanity's first expansion into the stars, had established thriving settlements across its temperate continents. These early inhabitants built cities that rivaled anything on Terra, their technology allowing them to harness the planet's abundant natural resources while maintaining harmony with its pristine environment. The Age of Strife shattered this paradise as thoroughly as it devastated the rest of human civilization. Warp storms that raged across the galaxy for 5,000 years cut Caliban off from the rest of humanity, but the planet's proximity to immaterium fractures meant that isolation was only the beginning of its troubles. The same warp anomalies that had initially attracted human colonists now served as gateways for entities that existed beyond the boundaries of normal space and time. Demons began manifesting in Caliban's deepest forests, their presence corrupting the very fabric of reality around them. The transformation occurred gradually, spanning generations as the planet's ecosystem adapted to the presence of chaos energy. Native wildlife mutated into monstrous forms, their bodies twisted by warp influence into shapes that violated natural law. Trees grew to impossible heights, their bark taking on metallic properties while their roots extended deep into the planet's core, drawing sustenance from sources that existed partially in the immaterium. The forests themselves became labyrinthine mazes where time and space functioned according to rules that changed without warning, creating pocket dimensions where unwary travelers could wander for subjective years, while only hours passed in the outside world. The great beasts that emerged from this corruption represented the apex of Caliban's transformation. These creatures combined the worst aspects of demonic influence with the adaptive capabilities of the planet's original fauna. Some resembled enormous predatory cats, their bodies covered in chitinous plates that could deflect Law's fire, while their claws dripped with toxins that induced madness in their victims. Others took the form of serpentine horrors that could phase in and out of reality, appearing without warning to drag entire patrols into pocket dimensions from which they never returned. The most dangerous specimens possessed rudimentary intelligence, using their supernatural abilities to coordinate attacks against human settlements with tactical sophistication that rivaled trained military units. Against this backdrop of escalating horror, Caliban's human population faced a choice between extinction and adaptation. The planet's technological infrastructure had largely collapsed during the early phases of the Age of Strife, leaving survivors with access to advanced weaponry but limited manufacturing capabilities. The social structures that emerged from this crisis drew heavily on humanity's martial traditions, as only those communities capable of effective military organization could hope to survive the constant predation from the corrupted forests. The knightly orders that rose to prominence during this period represented the culmination of Caliban's adaptation to its new reality. These organizations combined military necessity with spiritual discipline, recognizing that the threats they faced required more than conventional weapons and tactics. The knights understood, through bitter experience, that the great beasts and their lesser kin were not merely dangerous animals, but manifestations of something fundamentally antithetical to human existence. Their fortress monasteries served as both military installations and centers of learning, where scholars worked to understand the nature of their enemies while warriors trained to combat them. The order, which would eventually claim Lion El'Jonson as its greatest champion, exemplified the highest development of Calibanite knightly culture. Founded in the ruins of one of the planet's original cities, the organization built its fortress monastery, using architectural techniques that combined pre-Age of Strife technology with defensive innovations developed through centuries of warfare against supernatural enemies. The fortress's walls incorporated materials that had been blessed through rituals designed to repel demonic influence, while its internal layout followed geometric patterns that supposedly disrupted warp-based attacks. Luther emerged as the Order's most accomplished knight during the generation immediately preceding the Primarch's arrival. His reputation stemmed not only from his martial prowess, but also from his ability to inspire absolute loyalty among his followers. Unlike many knights who focused exclusively on combat skills, Luther possessed a keen understanding of the political and social dynamics that governed Caliban's fractured society. He recognized that the planet's survival depended on cooperation between its various knightly orders, and he worked tirelessly to forge alliances that transcended traditional rivalries. The relationship between Luther and the infant Primarch began with a discovery that would reshape both their destinies. The Order's patrol that found the child in Caliban's deepest forests had been tracking a particularly dangerous great beast, following its trail through regions where reality itself seemed unstable. The creature's spoor led them to a clearing where ancient stones formed patterns that predated human colonization, their surfaces covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. At the center of this formation lay the infant, apparently unharmed despite exposure to conditions that should have proven fatal to any normal human child. Luther's decision to adopt the foundling reflected both his compassionate nature and his recognition of the child's extraordinary potential. Even as an infant, the future Primarch displayed characteristics that set him apart from normal humans. His physical development proceeded at an accelerated rate, while his cognitive abilities manifested in ways that suggested intelligence far beyond his apparent age. More significantly, his presence seemed to have a calming effect on the corrupted environment around the Order's fortress monastery, as if his very existence provided a stabilizing influence against the warp energies that plagued Caliban. The training regimen that Luther developed for his adopted son combined traditional knightly disciplines with innovations designed to maximize the child's unique capabilities. Physical conditioning emphasized not only strength and endurance, but also the kind of spatial awareness necessary for combat in environments where reality could shift without warning. Weapons training covered every form of armament available to the Order, from ancient power weapons inherited from the Dark Age of technology to improvised tools crafted from materials scavenged from the corrupted forests. Intellectual development received equal emphasis, as Luther recognized that defeating Caliban's supernatural enemies required understanding as well as martial skill. The Order's libraries contained fragmentary records from the planet's Golden Age, including technical manuals that describe technologies beyond current manufacturing capabilities and historical accounts that provided insight into the nature of the corruption that had transformed their world. The young Primarch absorbed this knowledge with frightening efficiency, demonstrating an ability to synthesize information from disparate sources into coherent strategic frameworks. The spiritual dimension of the Primarch's education proved equally important, though Luther could not have understood its full significance at the time. Caliban's knightly orders had developed elaborate codes of conduct that emphasized personal honor, loyalty to one's brothers, and absolute dedication to protecting humanity from the forces that sought its destruction. These principles resonated strongly with the Primarch's innate nature, providing a moral framework that would guide his actions throughout his life. The rituals and ceremonies that accompanied knightly training served to reinforce these values while also providing psychological protection against the corrupting influence of chaos. As the Primarch matured, his relationship with Luther evolved from that of student and teacher to something approaching equality. The older knight recognized that his adopted son had surpassed him in every measurable aspect of martial capability, yet their bond remained strong because it was based on genuine affection rather than mere respect for authority. Luther took pride in the Primarch's achievements while also experiencing a growing sense of his own inadequacy, a psychological tension that would prove significant in later years. The Primarch's first independent campaigns against the great beasts demonstrated tactical innovations that revolutionized Caliban's approach to forest warfare. Previous generations of knights had relied primarily on defensive strategies, content to protect their settlements, while allowing the corrupted regions to remain largely untouched. The Primarch advocated for aggressive expeditions designed to eliminate threats at their source, arguing that passive defense would ultimately prove insufficient against enemies that grew stronger with each passing year. His tactical approach emphasized thorough reconnaissance, combined with overwhelming force applied at carefully selected points. Rather than attempting to clear entire forest regions through systematic advance, the Primarch identified key locations where the corruption seemed most concentrated and organized targeted strikes designed to disrupt the supernatural ecosystems that sustain the great beasts. These operations required precise timing and coordination, as the knights had to penetrate deep into hostile territory, accomplish their objectives, and withdraw before the forest's defenses could organize effective counterattacks. The success of these campaigns gradually shifted the balance of power on Caliban, as regions that had been considered permanently lost to corruption began showing signs of recovery. The Primarch's victories inspired other knightly orders to adopt similar tactics, leading to a planet-wide campaign that would eventually cleanse most of Caliban's surface of its supernatural predators. However, this apparent triumph came at a cost that would not become apparent until much later, as the systematic destruction of the corrupted forests drove the remaining chaos influences deeper underground, where they would fester and grow in ways that surface observers could not detect. The unification of Caliban's knightly orders under the Primarch's leadership represented a political achievement that matched his military successes. The planet's various organizations had maintained their independence for centuries, their rivalries and territorial disputes preventing effective cooperation against common threats. The Primarch's approach to diplomacy combined respect for traditional prerogatives with clear demonstrations of the benefits that unity could provide. Rather than simply conquering rival orders, he offered them partnership in campaigns that promised greater glory and more effective protection for their territories than they could achieve alone. The cultural synthesis that emerged from this unification process created a unique martial tradition that would profoundly influence the Dark Angel's Legion. Calibanite knightly culture emphasized personal honor and loyalty to one's brothers, values that complemented the Astartes' ideals of duty and sacrifice. The planet's long struggle against supernatural enemies had also developed a particular hatred for chaos and its manifestations, creating warriors who possessed both the skill and the motivation necessary for the Imperium's battles against the forces of the Warp. The fortress monasteries that served as training centers for new knights incorporated architectural and organizational principles that would later influence Dark Angel's recruitment practices. These installations combined living quarters, training facilities, libraries, workshops, and chapels in integrated complexes designed to foster brotherhood among their inhabitants while maintaining the discipline necessary for effective military organization. The daily routines followed by knight aspirants emphasized physical conditioning, weapons training, tactical study, and spiritual discipline in carefully balanced proportions that produced warriors capable of functioning effectively in the most challenging environments. The selection criteria used by Caliban's knightly orders differed significantly from typical military recruitment practices. Physical capability and martial potential were certainly important, but candidates were also evaluated for their adherence to the moral principles that governed knightly conduct. Honor, courage, loyalty, and spiritual strength were considered essential qualities that could not be taught to those who lacked them inherently. This approach produced warriors who possessed not only the skills necessary for combat, but also the psychological resilience required for prolonged campaigns against enemies that could corrupt as well as kill. The weapons and equipment used by Caliban's knights reflected the planet's unique circumstances and technological heritage. Many orders possessed ancient artifacts from the Dark Age of technology, including power weapons whose construction techniques had been lost for millennia. These relics were maintained through a combination of reverence and practical necessity, as their effectiveness against supernatural enemies made them invaluable assets in the ongoing struggle for survival. The knights also developed specialized equipment designed specifically for forest warfare, including armor modifications that provided protection against the exotic toxins secreted by mutated creatures and communications gear that could function reliably in environments where warp interference disrupted conventional technology. The corruption that had transformed Caliban's forests was not merely a surface phenomenon, but extended deep into the planet's geological structure. Ancient chaos artifacts, buried during the initial phases of the Age of Strife, continued to exert their influence through underground networks that connected distant regions of the planet. These buried sources of corruption created a hidden infrastructure that sustained the supernatural ecosystem even as surface manifestations were systematically eliminated. The knights who fought against the great beasts could observe the immediate effects of this corruption, but lacked the knowledge necessary to understand its true scope and nature. The warp storms that had isolated Caliban during the Age of Strife had also deposited various forms of chaos-tainted material across the planet's surface. Meteorites composed of substances that existed partially in the immaterium had crashed into the deepest forests, creating localized reality distortions that persisted for centuries. These impact sites became focal points for the corruption that spread throughout the surrounding regions, generating the pocket dimensions and temporal anomalies that made forest warfare so dangerous for human forces. The planet's original human colonists had unknowingly contributed to this corruption through their attempts to study and understand the warp anomalies that had attracted them to Caliban in the first place. Research facilities built during the Dark Age of technology had conducted experiments that weakened the barriers between the material universe and the immaterium, creating permanent breaches that allowed demonic influence to seep into the planet's core. The destruction of these facilities during the Age of Strife had scattered their contents across wide areas, spreading corrupted artifacts and research materials throughout the regions that would later become the domain of the great beasts. The gradual nature of this corruption made it particularly insidious, as its effects accumulated over generations without creating obvious warning signs that might have prompted more aggressive countermeasures. The knights who fought against the great beasts understood that they were dealing with supernatural enemies, but they lacked the theological and scientific knowledge necessary to recognize the true nature of chaos corruption. Their training emphasized practical techniques for combating demonic manifestations rather than theoretical understanding of the forces they opposed, a limitation that would prove significant when the corruption began manifesting in more subtle forms. The Emperor's arrival on Caliban marked not only the reunion of the first Primarch with his legion, but also the beginning of a division that would ultimately tear the Dark Angels apart. When Lion El'Jonson assumed command of the First Legion and departed Caliban to join the Great Crusade, he made a decision that seemed logical from a strategic perspective, but proved catastrophic in its long-term consequences. Luther, the man who had raised and trained the Primarch, found himself relegated to the position of Castellan of Caliban, tasked with overseeing the planet's defenses and training new recruits while his former student led the Legion to glory among the stars. The appointment carried the weight of necessity rather than honor. Luther's age, while not prohibitive by normal human standards, made him unsuitable for the grueling campaigns that characterized the Great Crusade. The process of Space Marine augmentation, when attempted on candidates beyond their physical prime, carried significant risks that could result in rejection, mutation, or death. The Primarch's decision to leave Luther on Caliban reflected practical considerations about the older knight's limitations rather than any lack of respect for his contributions. However, the emotional impact of this separation would prove far more significant than either man initially understood. Luther's new role placed him in command of a substantial force, composed primarily of Calibanite Dark Angels, who had been deemed unsuitable for Crusade operations. These warriors included veterans who had sustained injuries that limited their combat effectiveness, newer recruits whose training remained incomplete, and specialists whose skills were better utilized in defensive operations rather than offensive campaigns. The composition of this garrison force created an environment where resentment could flourish, as warriors who had expected to participate in humanity's greatest military endeavor instead found themselves assigned to what many perceived as secondary duties. The fortress monastery that served as Luther's headquarters had been constructed using the most advanced techniques available to the Dark Angels, incorporating both Terran engineering principles and Calibanite architectural traditions. Its massive walls rose from the bedrock of Caliban's largest continent, their surfaces studded with weapon emplacements capable of repelling orbital bombardment. The interior spaces combined training facilities, armories, libraries, and living quarters in a complex designed to house thousands of warriors while maintaining the monastic atmosphere that characterized Dark Angels' culture. Despite its impressive scale and sophisticated defenses, the fortress represented confinement rather than opportunity for the warriors stationed within its walls. The daily routine established by Luther for his garrison forces emphasized training and preparation for battles that might never come. Morning exercises began before dawn with physical conditioning that pushed even enhanced Astartes physiology to its limits. Combat drills followed, covering everything from individual weapons techniques to large-scale tactical maneuvers. The afternoon hours were dedicated to theoretical study, as Luther insisted that his warriors maintain their intellectual development even while isolated from active campaigning. Evening periods allowed for personal reflection and spiritual observance, activities designed to maintain the psychological discipline necessary for long-term garrison duty. The recruitment and training programs overseen by Luther represented one of the most comprehensive efforts to expand Astartes' numbers in the Legion's history. Caliban's population provided an abundant source of potential candidates, as the planet's knightly culture had produced generations of warriors whose physical and psychological characteristics made them ideal subjects for Space Marine augmentation. The selection process remained rigorous, with candidates undergoing extensive testing to evaluate their genetic compatibility, physical potential, and adherence to the moral principles that governed Dark Angels' conduct. The augmentation facilities constructed on Caliban rivaled those found on Terra itself, incorporating the most advanced medical technology available to the Imperium. The process of transforming human aspirants into Space Marines required precise surgical procedures, careful monitoring of biological responses, and extended recovery periods during which candidates remained vulnerable to complications. Luther personally oversaw many of these procedures, his presence providing reassurance to young warriors undergoing the traumatic transformation that would define the rest of their lives. Training regimens for new Dark Angels combined traditional Astartes disciplines with techniques developed specifically for Caliban's unique environment. Recruits learned to operate in the planet's remaining forest regions, where pockets of corruption still lingered despite the systematic cleansing campaigns of previous decades. These exercises served multiple purposes, providing practical experience in combat operations, while also reinforcing the Legion's commitment to protecting humanity from supernatural threats. The psychological impact of fighting actual chaos-tainted creatures, even weakened specimens, proved invaluable in preparing new warriors for the horrors they would eventually face during Crusade operations. The weapons and equipment produced in Caliban's manufactorums reflected both the planet's technological capabilities and its cultural traditions. Artificers working under Luther's direction created power weapons that incorporated design elements from ancient knightly arms, their blades etched with symbols that honored both the Legion's Terran heritage and Caliban's martial legacy. Armor patterns developed specifically for garrison forces emphasized durability and ease of maintenance over the specialized configurations used by Crusade elements, recognizing that warriors stationed on Caliban would need equipment capable of extended service without access to advanced repair facilities. As months turned to years, the psychological strain of garrison duty began affecting even the most disciplined warriors under Luther's command. Regular communications from the Crusade fleets brought news of victories and conquests that highlighted the contrast between the glory being won among the stars and the routine duties being performed on Caliban. Veterans who had fought alongside the Primarch during the planet's unification campaigns found themselves training recruits for battles they would never see, their experience and expertise underutilized in ways that bred frustration and resentment. Luther himself struggled with feelings of abandonment and inadequacy that grew stronger with each passing year. The man who had been Lion El'Jonson's mentor and father figure now found himself relegated to administrative duties, while his former student commanded one of the Imperium's most prestigious military formations. Reports of the Primarch's tactical innovations and strategic victories served as constant reminders of Luther's own limitations, creating a psychological wound that festered despite his attempts to maintain professional composure. The cultural dynamics within the garrison forces reflected broader tensions between Terran and Calibanite elements of the Dark Angel's Legion. Warriors recruited from Terra before the Primarch's discovery possessed different perspectives on duty and honor than their Calibanite brothers, leading to subtle but persistent conflicts over priorities and methods. Terran Dark Angels viewed their assignment to Caliban as a temporary setback, expecting eventual reassignment to Crusade operations once their skills were deemed necessary. Calibanite warriors, by contrast, felt a deeper connection to their homeworld and its defense, though many still harbored ambitions for off-world service. The administrative burdens of Luther's position required him to maintain detailed records of recruitment, training, equipment production, and planetary defense preparations. These documents, transmitted regularly to the Primarch's staff, provided comprehensive overviews of Caliban's contribution to the Legion's expansion efforts. The statistics were impressive by any objective measure, as Luther's programs had successfully doubled the number of Dark Angels under arms, while maintaining quality standards that matched those of other legions. However, the quantitative success of these efforts provided little emotional satisfaction for warriors who measured achievement in terms of battles won and enemies defeated. The planet's industrial infrastructure expanded significantly under Luther's administration, as new facilities were constructed to support the growing garrison and recruitment programs. Mining operations extracted raw materials from Caliban's crust, while manufactorums processed these resources into the weapons, armor, and equipment necessary for space marine operations. The economic development that accompanied this expansion brought prosperity to many Calibanite communities, though the benefits came at the cost of increased militarization that gradually transformed the planet's civilian society. Luther's attempts to maintain morale among his forces included the organization of competitive exercises and ceremonial events designed to provide outlets for warrior instincts that could not be satisfied through actual combat. Inter-company tournaments allowed garrison forces to demonstrate their skills in controlled environments, while formal ceremonies honored achievements in training and administration. These activities served their intended purpose to some degree, but they could not fully compensate for the absence of genuine military challenges that would allow warriors to prove themselves in battle. The corruption that had been driven underground during Caliban's cleansing campaigns began manifesting in increasingly subtle ways as the planet's defenses focused on external rather than internal threats. Ancient chaos artifacts buried beneath fortress monasteries and training grounds continued to exert their influence through mechanisms that remained undetected by conventional surveillance methods. The psychological stress experienced by garrison forces created vulnerabilities that these corrupting influences could exploit, beginning processes of spiritual degradation that would accelerate over time. Luther's own spiritual condition deteriorated gradually as his resentment toward the Primarch and his circumstances grew stronger. The older knight's natural charisma and leadership abilities made him a focal point for the discontent felt by other garrison warriors, creating a feedback loop that amplified negative emotions throughout the command structure. His private chambers became sites where criticism of the Primarch's decisions could be voiced without fear of official reprimand, fostering an atmosphere of conspiracy that would eventually attract the attention of chaos entities seeking to exploit the growing divisions within the Legion. The philosophical differences between Luther and Lion El'Jonson, which had remained dormant during their years of cooperation on Caliban, began emerging as fundamental incompatibilities that could not be reconciled through compromise or discussion. Luther's worldview emphasized the importance of personal relationships and emotional bonds between warriors, reflecting the knightly traditions that had shaped his character. The Primarch, by contrast, prioritized strategic objectives and institutional loyalty over individual concerns, an approach that seemed increasingly cold and calculating to those who remained on Caliban. The communication protocols established between the garrison forces and Crusade fleets created additional sources of tension, as the formal nature of official reports prevented the kind of personal interaction that might have maintained emotional connections between separated warriors. Luther's messages to the Primarch contained detailed information about recruitment numbers, training progress, and defensive preparations, but they lacked the personal warmth that had characterized their relationship during earlier years. The Primarch's responses, focused on strategic requirements and operational directives, reinforced Luther's growing sense that he had become merely another subordinate rather than a trusted mentor and friend. The training doctrines developed under Luther's supervision began incorporating subtle modifications that reflected his evolving understanding of warfare and leadership. While maintaining adherence to established Dark Angels principles, these changes emphasized the importance of personal initiative and emotional commitment over strict obedience to hierarchical authority. New recruits trained under these modified programs developed slightly different psychological profiles than their predecessors, displaying greater independence of thought, but also increased susceptibility to the kind of personal loyalty that could conflict with institutional discipline. The weapons caches and strategic reserves accumulated on Caliban during Luther's tenure represented one of the largest concentrations of military equipment outside the major Forge worlds. The stated purpose of these stockpiles was to support potential defensive operations and provide equipment for newly trained Dark Angels before their assignment to Crusade fleets. However, the actual quantities involved far exceeded any reasonable defensive requirements, suggesting either poor logistical planning or deliberate preparation for operations that had not been officially authorized. The outbreak of the Horus Heresy found the Dark Angels scattered across the galaxy's eastern fringe, their strength divided between multiple campaign theaters that prevented them from participating in the initial phases of the Civil War that would tear the Imperium apart. Lion El'Jonson had positioned his legion according to strategic priorities that emphasized the conquest of worlds beyond the main Crusade routes, seeking to expand Imperial territory into regions where other legions had not yet established their presence. This deployment pattern, while militarily sound from the perspective of territorial expansion, left the Dark Angels isolated from the political developments that were reshaping the relationship between the Emperor and his sons. The Thramma's Crusade emerged as the Dark Angels' primary engagement during the early years of the heresy, pitting them against the Night Lord's Legion in a series of brutal campaigns across the Thramma sector. The conflict began when Night Lord's forces, operating under the command of their Primarch Conrad Kurz, launched coordinated attacks against Imperial installations throughout the region. These assaults followed the Night Lord's characteristic pattern of psychological warfare, targeting civilian populations and infrastructure in ways designed to spread terror rather than achieve conventional military objectives. The systematic nature of these attacks indicated strategic planning that went beyond opportunistic raiding, suggesting that the Night Lords were implementing a comprehensive campaign to establish control over the sector. Lion El'Jonson's response to these attacks demonstrated the tactical flexibility that had made the Dark Angels one of the Imperium's most effective military formations. Rather than attempting to defend every threatened world simultaneously, the Primarch concentrated his forces for targeted strikes against Night Lord's fleet elements and command structures. The Dark Angels' superior void warfare capabilities, developed through centuries of operations in regions where space-based combat was more common than planetary assault, provided significant advantages in the ship-to-ship engagements that characterized much of the Thramma's fighting. The opening phases of the campaign saw Dark Angels strike forces conducting rapid deployment operations across multiple star systems, using their fleet's mobility to appear where Night Lord's commanders least expected them. These attacks focused on disrupting enemy supply lines and communication networks rather than engaging in prolonged battles for specific worlds. The strategy proved effective in limiting the Night Lord's ability to coordinate their terror campaigns, forcing them to operate in smaller, more vulnerable groups that could be defeated in detail by concentrated Dark Angels forces. Conrad Kurz's response to these tactics revealed the fundamental differences in strategic thinking between the two Primarchs. Where Lion El'Jonson approached warfare as a chess game requiring careful calculation and precise execution, the Night Haunter viewed combat as an opportunity to inflict maximum psychological damage on his enemies. The Night Lords began targeting Dark Angels' recruitment worlds and supply bases, launching attacks designed to provoke emotional responses rather than achieve tactical objectives. These assaults included the systematic torture of captured Dark Angels personnel and the deliberate targeting of civilian populations known to have connections with the First Legion. The psychological warfare employed by the Night Lords proved particularly effective against Dark Angels' forces that included significant numbers of Calibanite recruits. The knightly traditions that shaped these warriors' worldview emphasized the protection of innocents and the honorable treatment of defeated enemies, values that were systematically violated by Night Lords' tactics. Reports of atrocities committed against civilian populations created pressure within Dark Angels' ranks for more aggressive responses, leading to tactical decisions that sometimes prioritized vengeance over strategic effectiveness. Lion El'Jonson's command style during the Thramma's Crusade reflected his characteristic preference for centralized control and detailed planning. The Primarch maintained personal oversight of major operational decisions, while delegating tactical implementation to subordinate commanders who had proven their competence in previous campaigns. This approach allowed the Dark Angels to maintain strategic coherence across multiple theaters while adapting their methods to local conditions. However, the communication delays inherent in galaxy-spanning operations sometimes prevented rapid responses to changing tactical situations, creating opportunities that Night Lords' forces were quick to exploit. The void battles that punctuated the Thramma's Crusade showcased the technological and tactical superiority that the Dark Angels had developed through their extensive experience in space-based operations. Their fleet formations emphasized coordination between different ship classes, with escort vessels providing screening for larger units, while strike cruisers delivered concentrated firepower against priority targets. the Legion's boarding specialists, trained in the close quarters combat techniques necessary for ship-to-ship assault operations, proved particularly effective against Night Lord's vessels, whose crews were optimized for terror tactics rather than disciplined resistance. The planetary campaigns that accompanied these void operations demonstrated the Dark Angels' ability to adapt their methods to the specific challenges posed by Night Lord's occupation forces. Rather than conducting conventional planetary assaults, Dark Angels' forces often employed infiltration and sabotage techniques designed to eliminate enemy command structures before launching coordinated attacks. These operations required extensive intelligence gathering and careful coordination between different unit types, capabilities that reflected the comprehensive training programs that had characterized the Legion since its earliest days. The relationship between Lion El'Jonson and his brother Primarchs during this period revealed the complex political dynamics that were reshaping the Imperium even as the heresy raged across the galaxy. The first Primarch's strategic focus on the Thramas sector meant that he had limited direct contact with other Legion commanders, receiving most of his information about the broader conflict through official communications and intelligence reports. This isolation contributed to a sense of detachment from the political maneuvering that was influencing the loyalties of other legions, as Lion El'Jonson remained focused on tactical objectives rather than the ideological considerations that were driving the Civil War. The Primarch's interactions with Roboute Guilliman during this period illustrated the different approaches that loyal legions were taking to the crisis facing the Imperium. Where Guilliman was working to establish the Imperium Secundus as a backup government structure, Lion El'Jonson remained committed to prosecuting military campaigns against traitor forces. The philosophical differences between these approaches created tension between the two Primarchs, as each believed that his strategy offered the best hope for Imperial survival. The Dark Angels' commitment to the Thramas Crusade prevented them from participating in Guilliman's political initiatives, contributing to a sense of isolation that would have significant consequences for the Legion's development. The logistical challenges of maintaining military operations across the vast distances of the Thramas sector required innovative solutions that pushed Dark Angels' organizational capabilities to their limits. Supply lines stretched across multiple star systems had to be protected against Night Lord's raiding forces, while simultaneously supporting offensive operations against enemy strongholds. The Legion's fleet elements were forced to operate with greater independence than normal, as communication delays made centralized coordination impossible for many tactical decisions. This operational environment favored commanders who possessed the initiative and tactical flexibility necessary to adapt their methods to changing circumstances without waiting for specific orders from higher authority. The intelligence warfare that accompanied the Thramas Crusade revealed the sophisticated information networks that both legions had developed during their years of Great Crusade operations. Dark Angels reconnaissance specialists, trained in the infiltration techniques necessary for operations behind enemy lines, worked to identify Night Lord's command structures and supply networks. These efforts were complicated by the Night Lord's practice of using terror tactics to control local populations, as civilian informants were often too frightened to provide reliable intelligence even when they possessed information that could aid Imperial forces. The technological innovations that emerged from the Thramas fighting reflected the specific challenges posed by combat against an enemy that specialized in psychological warfare and terror tactics. Dark Angels artificers developed equipment modifications designed to protect their warriors against the fear-inducing weapons and techniques employed by Night Lord's forces. These included helmet modifications that filtered out sonic attacks designed to cause panic, armor upgrades that provided protection against the exotic toxins favored by Night Lord's apothecaries, and communication systems that could maintain functionality even when subjected to the electromagnetic interference generated by Night Lord's terror weapons. The training programs established by Dark Angels commanders during the Thramas Crusade emphasized psychological resilience and tactical flexibility in ways that reflected the specific challenges posed by Night Lord's opposition. New recruits received instruction in techniques for maintaining mental discipline when exposed to terror tactics, while veteran warriors participated in advanced training exercises that simulated the kind of asymmetric warfare that characterized much of the fighting in the Thramas sector. These programs produced warriors who were better equipped to handle the psychological stresses of combat against enemies who deliberately targeted their opponent's mental stability. The strategic implications of the Thramas Crusade extended beyond the immediate tactical objectives of defeating Night Lord's forces in the sector. The Dark Angels' commitment to this campaign prevented them from participating in other theaters, where their presence might have influenced the overall course of the heresy. The Legion's absence from the defense of Terra and other critical battles meant that their strategic impact on the Civil War was limited despite their tactical successes against the Night Lords. This isolation contributed to a sense within the Legion that they were fighting their own separate war rather than participating in the broader struggle for the Imperium's survival. The casualties sustained during the Thramas fighting reflected both the intensity of the combat and the specific challenges posed by Night Lord's tactics. Dark Angel's losses included not only warriors killed in conventional battle, but also personnel who had been captured and subjected to the systematic torture that was characteristic of Night Lord's operations. The psychological impact of these losses on surviving Dark Angels was significant, as the Legion's cultural emphasis on brotherhood and mutual loyalty made the suffering of captured comrades particularly difficult to endure. The knowledge that their brothers were being tortured by enemy forces created pressure for rescue operations that sometimes compromised tactical effectiveness. The command structure that Lion El'Jonson established for the Thramas Crusade reflected his preference for maintaining personal control over strategic decisions while allowing subordinate commanders significant tactical autonomy. The Primarch's inner circle included veterans who had served with him since the early days of the Great Crusade, officers whose loyalty and competence had been proven through years of successful operations. These commanders understood the Primarch's strategic thinking well enough to implement his intentions, even when specific orders were not available, a capability that proved essential given the communication challenges inherent in Galaxy spanning military operations. The relationship between the Dark Angels' Crusade elements and the garrison forces remaining on Caliban became increasingly strained as the Thramas Crusade continued. Communications between Lion El'Jonson and Luther grew more formal and less frequent, reflecting both the practical difficulties of maintaining contact across interstellar distances and the growing emotional distance between the two men. Luther's reports to the Primarch focused on recruitment numbers and defensive preparations, while the Primarch's responses emphasized the strategic importance of the Thramas operations and the need for continued support from the homeworld garrison. The intelligence reports that reached Luther and his garrison forces on Caliban provided only fragmentary information about the broader scope of the Horus Heresy, as the Dark Angels' isolation from other Imperial forces limited their understanding of events occurring in other sectors. This incomplete picture of the Civil War contributed to growing uncertainty about the Legion's role in the conflict and the likelihood of their eventual victory. The garrison forces' sense of isolation was compounded by their exclusion from the active fighting, creating psychological conditions that made them increasingly susceptible to alternative interpretations of their duty and loyalty. The weapons and equipment innovations that emerged from the Thramas Crusade reflected the specific tactical challenges posed by Night Lord's opposition and the resource constraints that limited the Dark Angels' ability to replace damaged or destroyed materiel. Field modifications to standard equipment became common as warriors adapted their gear to function more effectively in the terror warfare environment that characterized much of the fighting. These innovations included improvements to armor systems that provided better protection against fear-inducing weapons, modifications to bolter ammunition that proved more effective against Night Lord's power armor, and communication upgrades that maintained functionality despite enemy jamming efforts. The cultural impact of the Thramma's crusade on Dark Angel's identity reflected the psychological stresses of prolonged combat against an enemy that deliberately targeted their opponent's mental stability and moral convictions. The Legion's emphasis on honor and brotherhood was tested by exposure to Night Lord's tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Warriors who had been trained to protect innocent populations were forced to witness systematic atrocities while focusing on strategic objectives that sometimes prevented immediate intervention. These experiences created psychological wounds that would influence Dark Angel's culture for generations to come. The Lion's return to Caliban came at the war's end, when the galaxy still burned with the aftermath of brother fighting brother, and the Emperor lay entombed upon the Golden Throne. The Dark Angel's fleet emerged from the warp above their homeworld like avenging angels, their black and green hulls scarred by years of brutal warfare against the Night Lords and other traitor forces. Lion El'Jonson stood upon the bridge of his flagship, the Invincible Reason, gazing down at the world that had shaped his early years. The planet appeared unchanged from orbit, its verdant continents and gleaming fortress monasteries presenting the same pastoral beauty that had characterized Caliban since the Great Crusade's beginning. Yet the Primarch's enhanced senses detected subtle wrongness in the electromagnetic signatures emanating from the surface, anomalous readings that suggested technological preparations far beyond what garrison duties should require. The initial Vox communications between the fleet and planetary command followed standard protocols, with Luther's voice carrying across the void to welcome his former student home. The exchange maintained professional courtesy, though both men recognized the emotional distance that had grown between them during their years of separation. Luther reported on recruitment numbers, defensive improvements, and the continued loyalty of Caliban's population to the imperial cause. His words carried the weight of administrative competence, detailing the substantial contributions that the homeworld had made to the Legion's expansion during the Heresy years. However, the Primarch's tactical mind noted discrepancies in the reported equipment inventories and personnel deployments that suggested preparations for operations far exceeding defensive requirements. The Lion's decision to conduct a full orbital survey before making planetfall reflected both his natural caution and growing suspicions about conditions on Caliban. The sensor sweeps revealed defensive installations that had been significantly expanded beyond their original specifications, with weapon emplacements capable of engaging orbital targets and shield generators powerful enough to protect entire continents. The planet's industrial infrastructure had grown to support manufacturing capabilities that rivaled those of major forge worlds, producing quantities of weapons and equipment that far exceeded the needs of garrison forces. Most troubling were the energy readings from deep beneath the surface, signatures that suggested the activation of ancient technologies that should have remained dormant. The first landing parties consisted of veteran Dark Angels who had served with the Primarch since the early days of the Great Crusade, warriors whose loyalty was absolute and whose tactical expertise allowed them to assess potential threats quickly and accurately. These advance elements deployed to multiple locations across Caliban's primary continent, establishing secure perimeters around key installations while conducting reconnaissance of areas that showed unusual activity. The reports they transmitted back to the fleet painted a picture of a world preparing for war, with garrison forces conducting training exercises that emphasized defensive operations against orbital assault rather than the counter-insurgency tactics that would be appropriate for maintaining planetary security. The confrontation between Lion El'Jonson and Luther took place in the Great Hall of the Fortress Monastery, where the Primarch had been raised, its ancient stones bearing witness to the final dissolution of bonds that had once seemed unbreakable. The chamber's architecture reflected the synthesis of Terran and Calibanite influences that had characterized the Dark Angel's cultural evolution, with soaring buttresses supporting a vaulted ceiling decorated with heraldic devices that honored both the Legion's origins and its homeworld's knightly traditions. Banners hanging from the walls displayed the battle honors earned by garrison forces during their years of service, though their placement seemed to emphasize achievements independent of the broader legion, rather than contributions to collective glory. Luther's appearance shocked the Primarch, as the older knight showed signs of physical enhancement that should have been impossible given his age and previous medical history. The failed Space Marine augmentation procedures that had been attempted years earlier had left Luther with significant physiological limitations, yet he now displayed capabilities that approached those of a full Astartes. His movements possessed a fluid grace that spoke of enhanced reflexes and muscular coordination, while his eyes held an intensity that suggested psychological changes as profound as the physical ones. The source of these improvements remained unclear, though the Primarch's enhanced senses detected traces of warp energy that indicated involvement with forces beyond conventional Imperial science. The accusations that passed between the two men revealed the depth of the ideological chasm that had opened during their years of separation. Luther spoke of abandonment and betrayal, claiming that the Primarch had relegated Caliban's defenders to secondary status while pursuing personal glory among the stars. His words carried the weight of genuine grievance, as he detailed the sacrifices made by garrison forces who had been denied the opportunity to prove themselves in the great campaigns that were reshaping the galaxy. The older knight's rhetoric emphasized themes of loyalty to Caliban over loyalty to the broader Imperium, suggesting that the planet's interests had been subordinated to the ambitions of distant Terra. Lion El'Jonson's response demonstrated the cold logic that had made him one of the Imperium's most effective military commanders, as he systematically dismantled Luther's arguments while revealing the extent of his knowledge about conditions on Caliban. The Primarch had been aware of the garrison's expansion and the planet's industrial development, viewing these changes as necessary adaptations to the strategic situation created by the Horus Heresy. However, his investigation had revealed evidence of contact with forces that existed outside Imperial authority, including communications with agents whose loyalties remained questionable and the acquisition of technologies that bore the taint of chaos corruption. The revelation of Luther's treachery came not through dramatic confession, but through the gradual accumulation of evidence that made denial impossible. Intercepted communications revealed coordination with elements of the traitor legions, while analysis of the planet's industrial output showed production of weapons and equipment that matched specifications used by forces opposing the Imperium. Most damning were the archaeological excavations that had been conducted in Caliban's deepest forests, operations that had uncovered ancient artifacts whose nature violated every principle of Imperial doctrine. These discoveries suggested that Luther's forces had been deliberately seeking out sources of chaos corruption, using them to enhance their capabilities in ways that mirrored the practices of the traitor legions. The battle for Caliban began when Luther's forces opened fire on Dark Angel's positions around the primary spaceport, their weapons revealing capabilities that far exceeded what garrison troops should have possessed. The opening salvos included plasma cannon strikes that vaporized entire squads of Loyalist Marines, while coordinated missile barrages targeted the Primarch's command post with precision that indicated detailed intelligence about Dark Angel's tactical procedures. The attackers moved with enhanced speed and coordination that spoke of supernatural augmentation, their battle cries invoking powers that had no place in Imperial doctrine. The fighting that erupted across Caliban's surface defied conventional tactical analysis, as the planet's defenders employed weapons and techniques that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Fallen angels, as the traitor garrison forces came to be known, demonstrated abilities that allowed them to phase in and out of reality, appearing behind Loyalist lines before vanishing when counterattacks were launched. Their weapons fired projectiles that ignored armor and cover, while their vehicles moved with impossible speed across terrain that should have limited their mobility. The source of these capabilities became clear as the battle progressed, revealing the extent to which chaos corruption had infected the planet's defenders. Lion El'Jonson's tactical response to the rebellion demonstrated the strategic brilliance that had made him one of the Imperium's most feared military commanders. Rather than attempting to engage the fallen angels in the kind of supernatural warfare where they held advantages, the Primarch focused on conventional objectives that would cripple their ability to sustain organized resistance. Loyalist forces struck at communication centers, supply depots, and command facilities, using their superior training and equipment to achieve tactical objectives despite being outnumbered by the planetary garrison. The Primarch's personal leadership proved crucial in maintaining morale among his forces, as his presence provided psychological anchoring against the reality-distorting effects of chaos corruption. The siege of the fortress monastery that served as Luther's headquarters became the focal point of the planetary battle, as both sides concentrated their forces around the installation that had served as the Dark Angel's primary training facility. The ancient structure's defenses had been significantly enhanced since the Primarch's departure, with weapon systems that could engage targets in orbit and shield generators that created protective barriers around the entire complex. The attackers faced the challenge of penetrating these defenses while dealing with defenders who possessed supernatural abilities and weapons that violated conventional tactical doctrine. The orbital bombardment that Lion El'Jonson ordered represented a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his existence, as the Primarch chose to sacrifice his homeworld rather than allow chaos corruption to spread beyond Caliban's boundaries. The fleet's weapons opened fire on predetermined targets across the planet's surface, their salvos carefully calculated to destroy key installations while minimizing damage to civilian populations. However, the bombardment's effects exceeded all predictions, as the energy released by the destruction of ancient chaos artifacts created a cascade reaction that threatened to tear the planet apart. The warp storms that erupted from Caliban's core as the bombardment continued revealed the true extent of the corruption that had infected the planet during the years since the Horus Heresy's beginning. Ancient devices buried deep beneath the surface had been drawing power from the immaterium for decades, their influence gradually spreading through underground networks that connected distant regions of the planet. The orbital strikes that destroyed surface installations also damaged the containment systems that had kept these buried artifacts stable, releasing energies that existed partially outside normal space-time. The reality distortions that accompanied the planet's destruction created temporal and spatial anomalies that scattered the surviving fallen angels across the galaxy and through time itself. Warriors who had been fighting on Caliban's surface found themselves transported to distant worlds in different eras, their arrival often preceding the events that had led to their exile by centuries or millennia. The chaos entities that had been empowering Luther's forces used the planet's destruction as an opportunity to cast their pawns across space and time, ensuring that the Dark Angel's shame would pursue them throughout their future history. The final confrontation between Lion El'Jonson and Luther took place in the collapsing ruins of the fortress monastery, as the two men who had once been closer than brothers faced each other across a chasm that could never be bridged. The chamber where they fought bore the scars of orbital bombardment and supernatural warfare, its ancient stones cracking under the stress of reality distortions that made normal physics unreliable. Luther's enhanced capabilities allowed him to match the Primarch's superhuman abilities, their battle ranging across multiple levels of the fortress as the structure collapsed around them. The wound that Luther inflicted upon the lion came not through superior martial skill, but through the older knight's willingness to employ weapons that drew their power from chaos corruption. The blade that pierced the Primarch's chest carried toxins that existed partially in the warp, their effects spreading through his enhanced physiology in ways that conventional medical treatment could not address. The injury would have killed any normal human instantly, while even a standard space marine would have succumbed within minutes. Lion El'Jonson's Primarch constitution allowed him to survive, but the wound's supernatural nature prevented normal healing processes from taking effect. The Primarch's placement in stasis deep within the rock, the fragment of Caliban that survived the planet's destruction, represented both a desperate medical intervention and a symbolic act of penance. The advanced life support systems that maintained his existence drew power from the same technologies that had once sustained the fortress monastery, their operation requiring constant vigilance from the most skilled tech marines in the chapter. The chamber where the lion rested became the most sacred space within the rock, accessible only to the Supreme Grand Master and the inner circle who bore the burden of the Legion's greatest secret. The survival of the rock itself defied conventional understanding of planetary destruction, as the massive fragment of Caliban's core maintained structural integrity despite the forces that had shattered the rest of the world. The fortress monastery's deepest levels had been built using construction techniques that incorporated materials from the Dark Age of technology, their molecular structure enhanced through processes that created bonds stronger than conventional matter. The warp energies released during the planet's destruction had actually strengthened these ancient materials, creating a space-faring fortress that could serve as the Dark Angel's mobile headquarters for millennia to come. The immediate aftermath of Caliban's destruction left the surviving Dark Angels scattered across local space, their fleet elements struggling to maintain formation while dealing with the psychological trauma of witnessing their homeworld's annihilation. The warp storms that had accompanied the planet's death continued to rage throughout the system, creating navigation hazards that prevented immediate departure while also concealing the survivors from potential enemies who might have sought to exploit their weakened condition. The senior commanders who had remained loyal to the Primarch faced the challenge of maintaining unit cohesion while processing the magnitude of the betrayal they had discovered. The decision to conceal the truth about Caliban's destruction and the existence of the fallen angels represented a collective choice made by the surviving loyalist leadership, as they recognized that knowledge of the Legion's internal civil war could be used by enemies to undermine the Dark Angel's effectiveness and reputation. The official report submitted to Imperial authorities described the planet's destruction as the result of a warp storm that had consumed the system, making no mention of the rebellion that had precipitated the catastrophe. This deception required the cooperation of every surviving warrior, creating bonds of shared guilt and secrecy that would define the chapter's culture for 10,000 years. The technological salvage operations that followed the battle recovered significant quantities of equipment and information from the wreckage of Caliban's installations, though much of this material bore traces of chaos corruption that required careful handling and purification. The weapons and armor used by the fallen angels provided insight into the methods they had employed to enhance their capabilities, while captured communications equipment revealed the extent of their coordination with other traitor elements. The intelligence gathered from these sources would prove invaluable in the long campaign to hunt down and capture the scattered fallen angels, though it also served as a constant reminder of the Legion's shame. The recruitment protocols established in the aftermath of Caliban's destruction reflected the need to rebuild the Legion's strength while maintaining absolute security about the events that had led to their homeworld's loss. New aspirants underwent even more rigorous screening than before, with psychological evaluation procedures designed to identify any potential susceptibility to the kind of corruption that had claimed Luther and his followers. The training programs developed for these recruits emphasized loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium above all other considerations, though the instructors carefully avoided any detailed discussion of the Legion's recent history that might raise uncomfortable questions about their true motivations. The transformation of the surviving Dark Angels into an organization consumed by the pursuit of their fallen brothers began in the immediate aftermath of Caliban's destruction, as the scattered fleet elements regrouped around the rock and attempted to process the magnitude of what had transpired. The senior commanders who had witnessed Luther's betrayal and the planet's annihilation understood that their Legion faced a crisis that threatened not only their military effectiveness, but their very identity within the Imperium. The knowledge that nearly half their number had turned traitor, embracing the same chaos corruption that had driven the Horus Heresy, created a psychological burden that could not be shared with outsiders without risking the chapter's dissolution or worse. Supreme Grand Master Astellan, one of the few Terran-born Dark Angels to survive the purge that followed the Primarch's return, found himself tasked with establishing the organizational structures that would define the chapter's future operations. His experience during the Unification Wars and early Great Crusade provided him with perspectives that proved invaluable in developing strategies for dealing with the fallen angels who had been scattered across space and time by Caliban's destruction. The challenge he faced was unprecedented in Imperial history: how to hunt down warriors who possessed intimate knowledge of Dark Angel's tactics and equipment, while maintaining the secrecy necessary to prevent the chapter's shame from becoming public knowledge. The establishment of the Inner Circle represented the most significant organizational innovation to emerge from this crisis, creating a hierarchical structure of secrets that would govern Dark Angel's operations for millennia to come. The concept drew inspiration from the knightly orders of Caliban, where different levels of initiation had provided access to increasingly sensitive information about the planet's history and the true nature of the threats it faced. However, the Dark Angel's implementation of this system extended far beyond simple security protocols, creating a complex web of compartmentalized knowledge that ensured only the most trusted warriors would ever learn the full truth about their chapter's shameful past. The innermost level of this hierarchy consisted of the Supreme Grand Master and a handful of senior officers who possessed complete knowledge of the fallen angel's existence and the circumstances surrounding Caliban's destruction. These individuals bore the heaviest psychological burden, as they understood the full scope of the chapter's shame and the magnitude of the task that lay ahead. Their responsibilities included not only the strategic planning of hunt operations, but also the careful management of information flow within the chapter, ensuring that lower-ranking warriors received only the knowledge necessary for their specific roles without compromising overall security. The next tier of the Inner Circle included company masters, senior chaplains, and other officers who had been deemed trustworthy enough to receive partial information about the chapter's secret mission. These warriors understood that the Dark Angels were hunting specific targets whose capture was of paramount importance, though they were not informed about the true identity of their quarry or the reasons for their pursuit. Their role involved the tactical implementation of hunt operations, coordinating with other Imperial forces when necessary while maintaining plausible explanations for their chapter's unusual operational patterns. The broader membership of the Inner Circle encompassed veterans who had demonstrated exceptional loyalty and discretion over extended periods of service, earning them access to carefully selected pieces of information that allowed them to contribute to hunt operations without compromising security. These warriors might be told that they were pursuing dangerous heretics who possessed stolen Dark Angels equipment, or that they were recovering ancient artifacts that had been lost during the Horus Heresy. The partial truths they received were sufficient to motivate their participation while protecting them from the psychological burden of complete knowledge. The recruitment and indoctrination procedures developed for the Inner Circle emphasized psychological evaluation techniques that could identify warriors capable of bearing the weight of terrible secrets without succumbing to despair or madness. Candidates underwent extensive observation periods during which their reactions to stress, their adherence to chapter doctrines, and their ability to maintain discipline under extreme circumstances were carefully monitored. The selection process often took decades to complete, as the chapter's leadership recognized that hasty decisions could result in security breaches that would compromise the entire organization. The creation of the Deathwing as a specialized hunting force represented a tactical innovation that drew upon the Dark Angel's experience with Terminator armor operations, while adapting these capabilities to the specific requirements of pursuing the fallen angels. The company's distinctive bone-white color scheme served multiple purposes, honoring the memory of a legendary battle, while also providing psychological intimidation against enemies who might recognize the significance of their appearance. The Deathwing's equipment loadouts emphasized close quarters, combat capabilities, and defensive resilience, reflecting the expectation that their operations would often involve boarding actions against spacecraft or assaults on fortified positions where the fallen had taken refuge. The tactical doctrines developed for Deathwing operations incorporated lessons learned from the battle for Caliban, particularly the need to counter the supernatural abilities that many fallen angels had acquired through their exposure to chaos corruption. Standard Terminator armor was modified with additional protective systems designed to resist psychic attacks and reality distortions, while weapon configurations emphasized the kind of overwhelming firepower necessary to defeat enemies who might possess enhanced durability or regenerative capabilities. The company's training regimens included specialized exercises that prepared warriors for combat in environments where normal physics might not apply, using simulation chambers that could replicate the disorienting effects of warp influence. The Deathwing's organizational structure reflected the chapter's emphasis on secrecy and compartmentalized knowledge, with squad leaders receiving different levels of information depending on their role in specific operations. The company master possessed complete knowledge of their mission parameters and the identity of their targets, while squad sergeants might be informed only about the tactical objectives for their particular assignment. This approach ensured that operational security could be maintained even if individual warriors were captured or killed, preventing enemies from gaining comprehensive intelligence about Dark Angel's hunting operations. The establishment of the Ravenwing as a rapid response and reconnaissance force addressed the chapter's need for mobility and intelligence gathering capabilities that could support their hunt operations across the galaxy. The company's specialization in bike and speeder operations provided them with the tactical flexibility necessary to pursue leads about fallen angels' sightings, while maintaining the ability to withdraw quickly if their quarry proved too dangerous to engage with available forces. Their black color scheme and distinctive iconography served to distinguish them from other Dark Angels units, while also providing psychological intimidation against enemies who might recognize their reputation. The Ravenwing's operational methods emphasized stealth, speed, and precision intelligence gathering, capabilities that proved essential in tracking targets who possessed intimate knowledge of Imperial military procedures and could easily disappear into the vast populations of hive worlds or the lawless regions beyond Imperial control. Their training programs included advanced reconnaissance techniques, infiltration methods, and the kind of investigative skills necessary to piece together fragmentary information about fallen angels' activities from sources that might not even realize the significance of what they had witnessed. The company's equipment reflected their specialized role, with vehicles modified for extended independent operations and communication systems capable of maintaining contact across interstellar distances. Their weapons loadouts emphasized rapid-fire capabilities and mobility, allowing them to engage targets of opportunity while maintaining the ability to disengage before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The Ravenwing's artificers developed specialized ammunition types designed to incapacitate rather than kill, reflecting the chapter's preference for capturing fallen angels alive when possible. The intelligence networks that the Ravenwing established throughout Imperial space represented one of the most comprehensive information-gathering operations in the galaxy, rivaling those maintained by the Inquisition and other Imperial agencies. These networks included contacts within planetary governments, merchant guilds, mercenary companies, and even criminal organizations, all carefully cultivated to provide information about unusual activities that might indicate the presence of fallen angels. The management of these assets required considerable skill and resources, as the chapter had to maintain operational security while ensuring that their informants remained motivated to provide accurate intelligence. The psychological burden carried by Dark Angels, who learned the truth about their chapter's shameful past, manifested in various ways that affected both individual warriors and the organization as a whole. The knowledge that their own brothers had turned traitor, embracing the same chaos corruption that had nearly destroyed the Imperium, created feelings of guilt and shame that could not be easily resolved through conventional means. Many warriors struggled with questions about their own reliability, wondering whether they might possess the same weaknesses that had led to Luther's fall and the destruction of Caliban. The chapter's chaplains developed specialized counseling techniques designed to help warriors cope with the psychological stress of learning about the fallen angels, though these methods could only address the symptoms rather than the underlying causes of their distress. The emphasis on duty, honor, and redemption that characterized Dark Angel's culture provided some psychological anchoring, as warriors could channel their feelings of shame into determination to capture their fallen brothers and restore their chapter's honor. However, the secretive nature of their mission prevented them from seeking support from outside sources, creating isolation that could exacerbate existing psychological problems. The training regimens established for Dark Angels who were inducted into the Inner Circle included psychological conditioning designed to strengthen their mental resilience and prepare them for the emotional challenges they would face during hunt operations. These programs emphasized meditation techniques, spiritual disciplines, and the kind of mental compartmentalization that allowed warriors to function effectively despite carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. The chapter's librarians played crucial roles in these training programs, using their psychic abilities to monitor the mental state of their brothers and provide intervention when necessary. The impact of the secret mission on Dark Angel's tactical doctrine extended far beyond the specialized operations conducted by the Deathwing and Ravenwing, influencing the entire chapter's approach to warfare and strategic planning. Standard battle companies found their deployment patterns altered to support hunt operations, with assignments often determined by intelligence reports about potential fallen angels' activities rather than conventional military priorities. This approach sometimes put the chapter at odds with other Imperial forces who could not understand why the Dark Angels would abandon apparently important objectives to pursue what seemed like minor threats. The chapter's relationships with other Imperial organizations became increasingly complex as their secret mission influenced their operational priorities and methods. The Inquisition's interest in the Dark Angels' unusual behavior patterns created potential security risks that required careful management, as too much scrutiny could reveal information that would compromise the entire hunt operation. The chapter's leadership developed elaborate cover stories and misdirection techniques designed to satisfy Imperial bureaucrats while protecting their true objectives from discovery. The recruitment protocols established in the aftermath of Caliban's destruction reflected the chapter's need to rebuild their strength while maintaining absolute security about their secret mission. New aspirants underwent even more rigorous psychological screening than other chapters, with evaluation procedures designed to identify any potential susceptibility to chaos, corruption, or psychological instability that might compromise operational security. The training programs developed for these recruits emphasized loyalty, discretion, and the kind of mental discipline necessary to function within an organization built around the maintenance of terrible secrets. The fortress monastery constructed within the rock served as both the chapter's headquarters and a symbol of their commitment to their secret mission. Its chambers and corridors designed to facilitate the kind of compartmentalized operations that characterized their hunt for the fallen angels. The installation's security systems incorporated multiple layers of protection, including both technological measures and psychic barriers that prevented unauthorized access to sensitive areas. The deepest levels of the fortress contained facilities that few Dark Angels would ever see, including interrogation chambers where captured fallen angels could be held and questioned about their activities and the locations of their remaining brothers. The technological innovations that emerged from the chapter's hunt operations reflected their need for specialized equipment capable of dealing with enemies who possessed intimate knowledge of standard Imperial military hardware and tactics. Dark Angel's artificers developed weapons and armor modifications that incorporated lessons learned from encounters with fallen angels, including defensive systems designed to counter the supernatural abilities that many of their former brothers had acquired through exposure to chaos corruption. These innovations were carefully controlled to prevent their distribution to other Imperial forces, maintaining the chapter's technological advantages while also protecting secrets about the nature of their enemies. The strategic planning processes that governed Dark Angel's operations became increasingly complex as the chapter attempted to balance their secret mission against their official duties as a Space Marine chapter. The Supreme Grand Master and his inner circle had to coordinate hunt operations across multiple sectors while maintaining the appearance of conducting normal military campaigns, a challenge that required considerable skill in both tactical planning and political maneuvering. The chapter's reputation for secrecy and independence, established during the Great Crusade, provided some protection against outside scrutiny, though it also created suspicions that had to be carefully managed. The cataclysmic destruction of Caliban created a phenomenon unprecedented in Imperial history, as the warp storms that consumed the planet's core scattered the surviving fallen angels across both space and time through mechanisms that defied conventional understanding. The ancient chaos artifacts buried deep beneath Caliban's surface had been accumulating immaterium energy for millennia, their influence gradually weakening the barriers between reality and the warp, until the orbital bombardment triggered a cascade failure that tore holes in the fabric of space-time itself. The fallen angels who had been fighting across the planet's surface found themselves caught in these reality storms, their physical forms pulled into the warp and then expelled at random locations throughout the galaxy and across different temporal periods. The dispersal pattern that emerged from this catastrophe revealed the chaotic nature of warp travel when uncontrolled by conventional navigation methods. Some fallen angels materialized on worlds that would not be discovered by the Imperium for centuries, while others appeared in the midst of historical events that had occurred before their own births. The temporal displacement effects meant that dark angels' hunting parties might encounter fallen who had been living on distant worlds for decades, having arrived there shortly after Caliban's destruction, despite the hunt beginning only recently from the Loyalists' perspective. This chronological confusion created intelligence-gathering challenges that persisted throughout the millennia, as the Dark Angels could never be certain when or where their quarry might appear next. The individual fates of the scattered fallen angels varied dramatically based on their personal convictions, the degree of chaos corruption they had embraced, and the circumstances of their arrival at their new locations. Those who had fully committed themselves to Luther's cause and accepted the gifts of the dark gods found their transformation accelerating in the years following their dispersal. These warriors became Chaos Space Marines in the truest sense, their bodies and minds warped by prolonged exposure to warp energies until they bore little resemblance to their original forms. Their enhanced abilities came at the cost of their humanity, as they developed the physical mutations and psychological instabilities that characterized servants of the ruinous powers. Cypher emerged as perhaps the most enigmatic of all the fallen angels, his activities spanning millennia and multiple sectors of the galaxy in ways that suggested either supernatural longevity or the ability to manipulate temporal flows. Unlike many of his brothers who embraced obvious corruption or sought redemption through penitent service, Cypher appeared to follow an agenda that remained incomprehensible to both the Dark Angels who hunted him and the Imperial authorities who occasionally encountered his handiwork. His signature weapons, a plasma pistol and an ancient bolt pistol that some claimed dated back to the Great Crusade, became legendary among those few Imperial agents who had survived encounters with him. The mysterious warrior's operational methods defied conventional analysis, as he seemed to appear wherever significant events were unfolding, sometimes aiding Imperial forces against overwhelming odds and other times facilitating the downfall of planetary governments or military commands. His interventions followed no discernible pattern that Imperial strategists could identify, leading to speculation that he possessed prophetic abilities or access to information sources that allowed him to predict future developments. The Dark Angel's attempts to anticipate his movements consistently failed, as Cypher demonstrated an uncanny ability to remain one step ahead of even their most sophisticated intelligence networks. Marir Estelan, one of the few Terran-born Dark Angels to join Luther's rebellion, found himself transported to a feudal world on the galaxy's eastern fringe, where his knowledge of ancient Imperial military doctrine made him invaluable to the local population's struggle against Xeno's raiders. His arrival coincided with a major orc incursion that threatened to overrun the planet's primitive defenses, and his tactical expertise proved instrumental in organizing an effective resistance. Unlike many Fallen who sought to conceal their identities, Astellan openly acknowledged his Space Marine heritage, while carefully omitting any details about his chapter affiliation or the circumstances that had led to his exile. The former Dark Angel's integration into the planetary defense forces demonstrated how some fallen angels attempted to find redemption through service to humanity, even if they could not return to the Imperium proper. Astellan established training programs that transformed the world's feudal warriors into a disciplined military force capable of coordinating complex operations against technologically superior enemies. His efforts extended beyond mere tactical instruction, as he worked to improve the planet's industrial capabilities and establish communication networks that could provide early warning of future threats. The local population came to revere him as a legendary hero, unaware that their savior was a fugitive from imperial justice. Sar Davil represented another category of fallen angel, those who had embraced Luther's cause primarily out of loyalty to their mentor rather than genuine acceptance of chaos corruption. His dispersal brought him to a hive world where he attempted to blend into the massive population while struggling with guilt over his participation in the rebellion. The urban environment provided anonymity that allowed him to observe imperial society from the perspective of an ordinary citizen, an experience that gradually shifted his understanding of the Imperium's true nature and the consequences of the choices he had made on Caliban. The psychological burden of his exile manifested in increasingly erratic behavior as Davil attempted to find meaning in his new existence, while avoiding the Dark Angel's hunting parties that he knew would eventually track him down. His enhanced capabilities made it impossible for him to remain completely inconspicuous, as situations arose where his intervention was necessary to protect innocent civilians from the various threats that plagued Hive world existence. These actions, while motivated by genuine desire to help others, created patterns that skilled investigators could potentially trace back to their source, making his eventual discovery almost inevitable. The fallen angels who had embraced chaos corruption most completely found their dispersal across the galaxy provided opportunities to spread their taint to new populations and regions that had previously remained pure. These warriors became focal points for cult activities, using their enhanced abilities and charismatic presence to attract followers who could be gradually corrupted through exposure to heretical doctrines. Their knowledge of imperial military procedures and space marine capabilities made them particularly dangerous opponents, as they could anticipate and counter many of the tactics that would normally be employed against chaos cultists. Brother Tucholcha, whose name had been struck from all official records following Caliban's destruction, established himself as the leader of a death cult on a mining world where the harsh working conditions and high mortality rates created fertile ground for heretical beliefs. His preaching emphasized themes of liberation through destruction and the futility of loyalty to an imperium that treated its citizens as expendable resources. The cult's activities gradually escalated from ritual murders to coordinated attacks against imperial installations, drawing the attention of local Arbites forces, who proved inadequate to deal with enemies led by a former space marine. The mining world's isolation and strategic insignificance meant that imperial reinforcements were slow to arrive, allowing Tucholcha's cult to establish control over entire hive sectors before outside intervention could be organized. The fallen angel's tactical expertise enabled his followers to conduct asymmetric warfare against imperial forces with devastating effectiveness, using their knowledge of the hive's industrial infrastructure to create weapons and fortifications that conventional law enforcement could not overcome. The eventual imperial response required the deployment of guard regiments and Astartes forces, resulting in a conflict that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives before Tucholcha was finally cornered and killed. The unpredictable nature of fallen angels' appearances created persistent challenges for the Dark Angels' hunting operations, as their quarry might manifest anywhere in the galaxy without warning or apparent logic. The warp storms that had scattered them seemed to follow patterns that existed outside normal space-time, making it impossible to predict when or where the next sighting might occur. Dark Angels' intelligence networks had to maintain constant vigilance across thousands of worlds, monitoring for any signs of activity that might indicate the presence of their fallen brothers, while simultaneously conducting their official duties as a Space Marine chapter. The temporal displacement effects that accompanied many fallen angels' appearances added another layer of complexity to the hunting operations, as the Dark Angels might receive reports of their quarries' activities decades or centuries before the events that had led to their exile. These chronological paradoxes created intelligence analysis challenges that strained even the most sophisticated data processing capabilities, as investigators had to distinguish between genuine sightings and cases of mistaken identity, while accounting for the possibility that their targets might possess knowledge of future events. Interrogator Chaplain Asmodai developed specialized techniques for processing the fragmentary intelligence reports that constituted the primary source of information about fallen angels' activities. His methods emphasized pattern recognition and psychological analysis, attempting to identify behavioral signatures that could distinguish genuine fallen from other renegade space marines or enhanced humans who might be mistaken for Dark Angels. The challenge was complicated by the fact that many fallen had deliberately altered their appearance and operational methods to avoid detection, requiring investigators to look for subtle indicators that might not be apparent to casual observers. The Raven Wing's reconnaissance operations across Imperial space revealed the extent to which fallen angels had integrated themselves into various aspects of galactic society, often assuming identities and roles that allowed them to remain hidden for extended periods. Some had become mercenary leaders, using their military expertise to build private armies that could be employed for legitimate or illegitimate purposes depending on the client's requirements. Others had established themselves as advisors to planetary governors or military commanders, using their positions to influence imperial policy in ways that served their personal agendas or the broader goals of chaos corruption. The discovery that several fallen angels had infiltrated Imperial Guard regiments as training instructors or tactical advisors created particular concern among the Dark Angels' leadership, as these positions provided access to classified military information and opportunities to corrupt entire units through subtle indoctrination. The process of identifying and eliminating these infiltrators required careful coordination with other Imperial agencies, as direct action against suspected fallen could compromise ongoing military operations or reveal the true nature of the Dark Angels' concerns to unauthorized personnel. Captain Balath of the Raven Wing documented numerous cases where fallen angels had established legitimate businesses or trade operations that provided both cover for their activities and resources to support other fugitives from Imperial justice. These enterprises ranged from small-scale smuggling operations to major industrial concerns that employed thousands of workers across multiple star systems. The economic networks created by these businesses often proved more valuable to the fallen than their military capabilities, as they provided means of communication, transportation, and resource acquisition that were difficult for Imperial authorities to monitor or disrupt. The psychological profiles developed by Dark Angels analysts revealed significant variations in how individual fallen angels had adapted to their exile and the choices they had made regarding their relationship with chaos corruption. Some had embraced their fall completely, allowing the dark gods to transform them into creatures that bore little resemblance to their original forms. Others had resisted corruption while acknowledging that they could never return to Imperial service, attempting to find meaning in their existence through acts of service or penance that might not erase their crimes, but could at least provide some measure of personal redemption. The most dangerous category consisted of fallen angels who had accepted limited corruption in exchange for enhanced abilities, while maintaining enough of their original personality and intelligence to function effectively in Imperial society. These individuals possessed the tactical knowledge and combat capabilities of Space Marines, combined with supernatural powers that made them extremely difficult to detect or defeat. Their integration into various imperial institutions created security risks that extended far beyond their individual actions, as they could potentially influence policy decisions or military operations in ways that served the interests of the ruinous powers. The geographic distribution of fallen angel sightings across the galaxy suggested that their dispersal had been truly random, rather than following any pattern that might have been anticipated or controlled. Reports came from every segmentum of imperial space, including regions that had been considered secure from chaos influence and worlds that had never experienced significant military activity. The apparently arbitrary nature of their appearances meant that Dark Angels hunting parties had to maintain readiness for deployment to any location at short notice, requiring logistical capabilities that strained even their considerable resources. The long-term implications of the fallen angels' dispersal became apparent as centuries passed, and their influence began manifesting in various forms across imperial space. Some had established bloodlines that carried genetic markers of their enhanced physiology, creating populations with latent abilities that might not manifest for generations. Others had founded religious movements or philosophical schools that gradually introduced heretical concepts into imperial culture through seemingly innocuous teachings. The cumulative effect of these influences represented a form of slow-acting corruption that could potentially undermine imperial society from within over extended periods. The Dark Angels' recognition that their hunt might continue indefinitely created psychological pressures that affected the entire chapter's culture and operational methods. The knowledge that their shame would persist as long as any fallen angels remained at large transformed their mission from a temporary crisis response into a permanent aspect of their identity. This realization influenced recruitment practices, training programs, and strategic planning in ways that gradually reshaped the chapter's character, while maintaining their effectiveness as a military force capable of fulfilling their official duties to the Imperium. The second founding marked a pivotal moment for the Dark Angels, as the Codex Astartes demanded the division of the surviving Space Marine legions into smaller, more manageable chapters. For most legions, this represented a straightforward administrative process of reorganizing existing forces according to new tactical doctrines and command structures. The Dark Angels faced a fundamentally different challenge, as their compliance with Guilliman's reforms required them to share their deepest shame with newly created organizations, while ensuring that the hunt for the fallen angels could continue across multiple independent commands. The solution they developed would create the most secretive alliance in Imperial history, binding successor chapters together through bonds of shared guilt and common purpose that transcended normal inter-chapter relationships. Supreme Grand Master Astellan oversaw the complex process of selecting which Dark Angels would form the core leadership of the new chapters, a decision that required balancing military effectiveness against security considerations. The warriors chosen to lead these organizations needed sufficient knowledge of the fallen angels' situation to understand their true mission, while possessing the psychological resilience necessary to bear such terrible secrets without compromising their effectiveness as military commanders. The selection process took months to complete, as each candidate underwent extensive evaluation to ensure their suitability for the enormous responsibilities they would inherit. The Angels of Absolution emerged as the first successor chapter to be fully briefed on the existence of the fallen angels, their leadership drawn from Dark Angels veterans who had participated in the hunt operations during the decades following Caliban's destruction. Chapter Master Vaisego brought with him detailed knowledge of fallen angels' operational patterns and the specialized tactics necessary for conducting capture operations without alerting Imperial authorities to their true nature. His command staff included former Deathwing and Ravenwing veterans, whose expertise in Terminator operations and reconnaissance work provided the new chapter with immediate capabilities for independent hunting operations. The chapter's fortress monastery was constructed using architectural principles that incorporated the same security features that characterized the Rock, including multiple levels of restricted access areas where sensitive operations could be conducted without observation by unauthorized personnel. The facility's interrogation chambers were designed according to specifications developed by interrogator Chaplain Asmodai, incorporating both physical restraint systems and psychic dampening fields that could contain even the most dangerous fallen angels until their eventual repentance or execution. The monastery's communication arrays included encrypted channels that allowed secure coordination with other Unforgiven chapters while maintaining the appearance of routine inter-chapter cooperation. The Angels of Redemption received their inheritance of shame through a carefully orchestrated revelation process that began with their chapter master's induction into the inner circle during the final stages of their organizational development. Master Saphon had served as a company captain during the Thrama's crusade, his experience fighting against chaos corrupted space marines providing him with the psychological preparation necessary for learning about the fallen angel's existence. The knowledge that his own Gene brothers had turned traitor created the same feelings of guilt and determination that drove the original Dark Angels, ensuring that his chapter would embrace their hunting mission with appropriate dedication. The chapter's specialization in redemptive warfare reflected their founders' belief that the fallen angels could potentially be saved through proper application of spiritual discipline and tactical pressure. Their chaplains developed interrogation techniques that emphasized psychological manipulation over physical coercion, attempting to break down the mental barriers that prevented fallen angels from acknowledging their crimes and seeking genuine repentance. These methods proved effective in several cases, though the process often required years of careful work before achieving meaningful results. The Angels of Vengeance represented the most aggressive approach to the fallen angels' problem, their chapter culture emphasizing the complete destruction of their gene line's shame through the systematic elimination of every traitor who had escaped Caliban's destruction. Chapter Master Raziel had witnessed the final confrontation between Lion El'Jonson and Luther, his presence during that climactic battle providing him with first-hand understanding of the corruption that had claimed their fallen brothers. His experiences shaped the chapter's tactical doctrines, which prioritized rapid deployment and overwhelming firepower over the capture operations favored by other Unforgiven chapters. The chapter's recruitment practices emphasized candidates who displayed exceptional hatred for traitors and heretics, psychological profiles that made them particularly effective in combat against chaos-corrupted enemies, while also ensuring their absolute commitment to the hunting mission. Their training programs included specialized courses in anti-chaos warfare, teaching techniques for combating enemies who possessed supernatural abilities or access to warp-based powers. The Angels of Vengeance's artificers developed weapons and equipment specifically designed for killing fallen angels, including blessed ammunition that could disrupt the protective effects of chaos corruption and armor modifications that provided enhanced protection against psychic attacks. The disciples of Caliban emerged from the remnants of the planet's knightly orders who had remained loyal during Luther's rebellion, their chapter structure reflecting the hierarchical traditions that had governed Calibanite society before the world's destruction. Chapter Master Belial drew upon his extensive knowledge of the planet's history and culture to establish recruitment practices that emphasized the same virtues of honor, loyalty, and spiritual discipline that had characterized the original knightly brotherhoods. The chapter's fortress monastery incorporated architectural elements salvaged from Caliban's ruins, creating physical connections to their lost homeworld that served as constant reminders of their duty to redeem their gene line's honor. The chapter's approach to hunting operations emphasized the same methodical tactics that had proven effective during Caliban's cleansing campaigns against the great beasts, with careful reconnaissance and preparation preceding coordinated strikes designed to eliminate or capture specific targets. Their librarians developed specialized techniques for tracking fallen angels across interstellar distances, using psychic divination methods that could identify the distinctive warp signatures left by their corrupted gene brothers. These abilities proved invaluable in coordinating multi-chapter operations that required precise timing and coordination across vast distances. The Lions Rampant represented an attempt to create a successor chapter that could operate with greater independence from the main Dark Angels organization, while still contributing to the hunt for the fallen angels. Chapter Master Samuel established his forces on a frontier world where they could conduct training exercises and recruitment operations without attracting the attention of Imperial authorities who might question their unusual operational patterns. The chapter's specialization in rapid strike operations made them particularly effective at responding to fallen angel sightings in remote regions where other Imperial forces might not be available for immediate deployment. The coordination mechanisms established between the Unforgiven chapters required sophisticated communication networks and intelligence sharing protocols that could function across interstellar distances while maintaining absolute security against outside observation. The system developed by the Supreme Grand Masters incorporated multiple layers of encryption and authentication that ensured only authorized personnel could access sensitive information about hunting operations. Regular conclaves brought together the leadership of all Unforgiven chapters to coordinate strategic planning and share intelligence about fallen angels' activities, though these gatherings were disguised as routine inter-chapter cooperation meetings to avoid attracting unwanted attention. The resource allocation required to support hunting operations across multiple chapters placed significant strains on the Unforgiven's collective capabilities, as they had to maintain their official military effectiveness while dedicating substantial portions of their strength to secret missions that provided no recognition or reward from Imperial authorities. The solution involved establishing shared logistics networks that allowed chapters to pool their resources when conducting major operations while maintaining independent capabilities for routine deployments. These arrangements required careful coordination to ensure that no single chapter became so weakened by hunting activities that their combat effectiveness was compromised. The training exchange programs developed between Unforgiven chapters served multiple purposes, allowing warriors to gain experience with different tactical approaches, while also ensuring that knowledge about hunting operations remained current throughout the Alliance. Veterans of successful capture missions traveled between chapters to share their expertise, while specialists in interrogation techniques provided instruction to chaplains and librarians who might encounter fallen angels during their own operations. These exchanges also served to reinforce the bonds between chapters, creating personal relationships that strengthened their commitment to the shared mission. The intelligence networks maintained by the Unforgiven chapters represented one of the most comprehensive information gathering operations in Imperial space, with assets and contacts distributed across thousands of worlds throughout multiple segmentums. The coordination of these networks required sophisticated data analysis capabilities and secure communication systems that could process vast quantities of information while identifying patterns that might indicate fallen angels' activity. The challenge was complicated by the need to maintain operational security while sharing intelligence between multiple organizations that operated independently in most other respects. The psychological burden of maintaining the hunt across multiple chapters created unique challenges that required innovative solutions from the Unforgiven leadership. Warriors who learned about the fallen angels often experienced feelings of shame and guilt that could affect their combat effectiveness if not properly managed. The chaplains and librarians responsible for providing spiritual guidance developed specialized counseling techniques that helped warriors channel their negative emotions into determination to complete their mission, while maintaining the psychological stability necessary for effective military service. The recruitment practices employed by Unforgiven chapters reflected their need to identify candidates who possessed the psychological characteristics necessary for bearing terrible secrets while maintaining absolute loyalty to their organizations. The selection processes emphasized mental resilience, spiritual discipline, and the kind of moral certainty that could withstand exposure to knowledge about their gene line's shame without compromising their effectiveness as space marines. These requirements made recruitment more challenging than for other chapters, as suitable candidates were relatively rare among the general population. The technological innovations developed by Unforgiven artificers reflected their specialized mission requirements, including equipment designed specifically for capturing and containing fallen angels who might possess supernatural abilities or access to chaos-enhanced weapons. These innovations included restraint systems that could hold enhanced humans with Space Marine-level strength, psychic dampening devices that could disrupt warp-based powers, and specialized ammunition types that could incapacitate targets without causing fatal injuries. The distribution of these technologies was carefully controlled to prevent their capabilities from becoming known to outside observers. The strategic planning processes that governed Unforgiven operations required balancing their secret hunting mission against their official duties as Space Marine chapters, a challenge that became increasingly complex as the scope of their activities expanded across the galaxy. The Supreme Grand Masters had to coordinate deployment schedules that ensured adequate forces remained available for hunting operations while maintaining the appearance of conducting normal military campaigns. This balancing act required sophisticated logistical planning and careful political maneuvering to avoid attracting unwanted attention from Imperial authorities. The operational security measures employed by the Unforgiven chapters extended beyond simple information compartmentalization to include elaborate cover stories and misdirection techniques designed to conceal the true nature of their activities from outside observers. These measures included the creation of false mission reports, the establishment of dummy operations that provided plausible explanations for unusual deployment patterns, and the careful management of casualty reports to prevent patterns that might reveal their involvement in unauthorized activities. The complexity of these deception operations required dedicated personnel and resources that further strained the chapter's capabilities. The long-term implications of the Unforgiven alliance became apparent as centuries passed, and the hunt for the fallen angels continued without achieving decisive success. The psychological and resource costs of maintaining the secret mission across multiple chapters created cumulative effects that gradually influenced their culture and operational methods in ways that distinguished them from other Space Marine organizations. The emphasis on secrecy and compartmentalized knowledge created command structures that were more hierarchical and less flexible than those found in Codex-compliant chapters, while the constant focus on hunting operations influenced tactical doctrines and equipment choices in subtle but significant ways. The relationship between the Unforgiven chapters and other Imperial organizations became increasingly complex as their unusual operational patterns attracted attention from various agencies responsible for monitoring Space Marine activities. The Inquisition's interest in their secretive behavior created potential security risks that required careful management, while their frequent deployment to regions where fallen angels had been sighted sometimes put them at odds with local Imperial authorities who could not understand their priorities. The Unforgiven leadership developed sophisticated political networks designed to deflect official scrutiny while maintaining their freedom of action for hunting operations. The creation of the Interrogator Chaplain position within the Dark Angels represented a fundamental evolution of the traditional chaplain role, transforming spiritual guardians into specialized inquisitors capable of extracting confessions from the most hardened traitors in the galaxy. These warriors combined the theological knowledge necessary to combat chaos corruption with the psychological expertise required to break down mental barriers that had been reinforced by centuries of guilt, shame, and supernatural influence. The first Interrogator chaplains emerged from the ranks of chaplains who had witnessed the final battle on Caliban, their understanding of Luther's fall providing them with insights into the psychological mechanisms that had enabled the corruption of their battle brothers. Interrogator Chaplain Asmodai established many of the techniques and protocols that would define the position for millennia to come, his methods drawing upon both imperial doctrine and the darker arts of psychological manipulation that had been developed during humanity's long struggle against chaos. His approach emphasized the systematic dismantling of the mental defenses that fallen angels constructed to protect themselves from acknowledging their crimes, using a combination of physical discomfort, sensory deprivation, and carefully crafted theological arguments to create psychological pressure that few subjects could withstand indefinitely. The process often required months or years of patient work, as the corruption that had claimed the fallen angels had created mental barriers that resisted conventional interrogation methods. The Tower of Angels, constructed within the deepest levels of the rock, served as the primary facility for holding and interrogating captured fallen angels, its chambers designed according to specifications that incorporated both advanced imperial technology and ancient techniques for containing supernatural entities. The tower's architecture followed principles that had been developed during the Dark Age of technology, using materials and construction methods that created spaces where psychic phenomena could be controlled and directed according to the interrogator's requirements. The walls incorporated blessed ceramite and sanctified adamantium that had been treated with oils and incense blessed by the emperor himself, creating barriers that could contain even the most powerful chaos-enhanced prisoners. The individual cells within the Tower of Angels reflected different approaches to the interrogation process, each designed to address specific types of psychological resistance that fallen angels might employ to protect themselves from confession. Some chambers featured complete sensory deprivation, their walls absorbing all sound and light while maintaining perfect temperature control that eliminated any external stimuli that might provide mental anchoring for the prisoner. Other cells incorporated carefully calibrated sensory overload systems that bombarded occupants with shifting patterns of light, sound, and electromagnetic radiation designed to disrupt normal thought processes and create vulnerability to psychological manipulation. The interrogation chambers themselves represented the culmination of millennia of refinement in the arts of extracting confessions from enhanced humans who possessed both supernatural abilities and intimate knowledge of imperial security procedures. The primary chamber featured a massive chair constructed from materials that had been blessed by every chaplain in the chapter's history, its restraint systems capable of holding subjects with Space Marine level strength while monitoring their vital signs and neurological responses. The chair's design incorporated psychic dampening fields that could suppress warp-based abilities, while allowing interrogators to maintain precise control over their subject's mental state throughout the questioning process. The walls of the interrogation chambers displayed religious iconography and chapter heraldry that served multiple psychological purposes, reminding prisoners of the oaths they had broken, while simultaneously reinforcing the spiritual authority of their interrogators. Ancient banners bearing the names of battles fought during the Great Crusade hung alongside newer editions commemorating victories against chaos forces, creating a visual narrative of loyalty and service that contrasted sharply with the prisoner's own history of betrayal. The lighting systems could be adjusted to create specific atmospheric effects, from the harsh glare that eliminated shadows and hiding places to the dim illumination that created an atmosphere of confession and penitence. The interrogation process itself followed carefully developed protocols that had been refined through centuries of experience with different types of fallen angels, each approach tailored to the specific psychological profile and degree of corruption exhibited by individual prisoners. The initial phase focused on establishing the interrogator's authority and the futility of resistance, using a combination of theological arguments and demonstrations of superior knowledge to break down the prisoner's confidence in their ability to maintain their secrets. This phase often lasted for weeks, as interrogator chaplains worked to understand the specific mental defenses that their subject had constructed while gradually introducing doubt about the righteousness of their cause. The second phase involved the systematic dismantling of the prisoners' justifications for their betrayal, using detailed knowledge of imperial doctrine and chapter history to demonstrate the falseness of the arguments that had led them to embrace Luther's rebellion. Interrogator chaplains drew upon extensive libraries of theological texts and historical records to construct counter-arguments that addressed every possible rationalization the prisoner might employ to justify their actions. The process required extraordinary patience and intellectual rigor, as many fallen angels possessed sophisticated understanding of imperial theology that allowed them to construct elaborate philosophical frameworks to support their treachery. The physical aspects of the interrogation process were carefully calibrated to create discomfort without causing permanent damage that might interfere with the prisoner's ability to provide useful information. The restraint systems applied precisely measured pressure to nerve clusters that created intense pain without causing actual injury, while environmental controls could adjust temperature, humidity, and air pressure to levels that remained within survivable parameters while causing significant discomfort. The interrogators monitored their subjects' physiological responses constantly, using advanced medical equipment to ensure that the stress levels remained within acceptable bounds while maximizing the psychological impact of the experience. The spiritual warfare techniques employed by interrogator chaplains represented some of the most sophisticated methods for combating chaos corruption that had been developed within the Imperium, drawing upon both official imperial doctrine and carefully guarded knowledge that had been accumulated through centuries of fighting against the ruinous powers. These techniques included prayers and litanies that had been specifically composed to counter the mental influences of chaos entities, their words and rhythms designed to disrupt the psychological patterns that allowed corruption to maintain its hold over the prisoner's mind. The interrogators often spent hours reciting these prayers, while their subjects were forced to listen, the repetitive nature of the process gradually wearing down mental barriers that protected heretical beliefs. The use of sacred relics and blessed artifacts during interrogation sessions provided both psychological pressure and actual supernatural protection against the corrupting influences that many fallen angels carried with them. These items included fragments of armor worn by Lion El'Jonson during the Great Crusade, pages from books that had been blessed by the Emperor himself, and weapons that had been used to slay notable servants of chaos during the chapter's long history. The presence of these relics created an atmosphere of sanctity that made it difficult for chaos-corrupted prisoners to maintain their mental defenses, while simultaneously providing protection for the interrogators against any supernatural attacks their subjects might attempt. The psychological profiles developed for different categories of fallen angels allowed interrogator chaplains to tailor their approaches according to the specific types of corruption and mental defense mechanisms that individual prisoners exhibited. Those who had embraced chaos corruption completely required different techniques than warriors who had been motivated primarily by loyalty to Luther or resentment against the Primarch's leadership decisions. The interrogators maintained detailed records of successful techniques and approaches, creating a comprehensive database of methods that could be applied to future cases, while also identifying patterns that might predict which prisoners were most likely to achieve genuine repentance. The rare instances of successful redemption represented the ultimate validation of the interrogator chaplain's methods, though these victories came at enormous cost in time, resources, and emotional investment from the interrogators themselves. The process of genuine repentance required the prisoner to acknowledge not only their specific crimes, but also the fundamental corruption that had made those crimes possible, a psychological transformation that often took years to achieve and could never be guaranteed, even with the most skilled interrogators. The redeemed fallen angels who achieved this state of grace typically spent the remainder of their lives in penitent service, their knowledge and experience providing valuable intelligence about chaos corruption, while their example served to inspire hope among their interrogators. Brother librarian Ezekiel developed specialized psychic techniques that complemented the physical and psychological methods employed by interrogator chaplains, using his abilities to probe the mental barriers that protected his subjects' deepest secrets, while simultaneously providing protection against any chaos-enhanced abilities they might possess. His methods involved careful psychic manipulation that could influence emotional states and memory recall without causing the kind of obvious mental damage that would compromise the prisoner's value as a source of information. The techniques required extraordinary skill and control, as any mistake could result in the complete destruction of the prisoner's mind or the corruption of the interrogator himself. The training programs established for aspiring interrogator chaplains emphasized both theological knowledge and practical psychology, requiring candidates to master complex theories about human motivation and mental manipulation while maintaining the spiritual discipline necessary to resist the corrupting influences they would encounter during their work. The selection process identified chaplains who possessed the intellectual capacity necessary for understanding sophisticated theological arguments, while also demonstrating the emotional resilience required to conduct interrogations that might last for years without achieving meaningful results. Many candidates failed during the training process, their psychological profiles indicating that they lacked the specific combination of compassion and ruthlessness that effective interrogation required. The support systems established within the Tower of Angels included medical facilities staffed by apothecaries who specialized in treating the physical and psychological effects of prolonged interrogation on both prisoners and interrogators. The work took a significant toll on the interrogator chaplains themselves, as constant exposure to chaos, corruption, and the psychological stress of conducting extended interrogations created mental strain that could compromise their effectiveness or even their loyalty if not properly managed. The medical staff monitored the interrogator's mental state constantly, providing counseling and spiritual guidance designed to maintain their psychological stability while ensuring that their dedication to the mission remained absolute. The technological innovations developed specifically for the Tower of Angels included communication systems that could maintain contact with other Unforgiven chapters while preventing any possibility of unauthorized interception or monitoring by outside agencies. These systems incorporated multiple layers of encryption and psychic shielding that ensured sensitive information about interrogation, techniques, and prisoner confessions remained secure from both technological surveillance and psychic intrusion. The equipment also included specialized recording devices that could document confession sessions while protecting the identity of both interrogators and prisoners from potential discovery by imperial authorities who lacked proper authorization. The administrative challenges of maintaining the Tower of Angels required sophisticated logistical support that could provide everything necessary for extended interrogation operations while maintaining absolute secrecy about the facility's true purpose and the identity of its occupants. The supply chains established for this purpose included sources of specialized equipment, medical supplies, and consumables that could not be obtained through normal chapter procurement channels without raising questions about their intended use. The logistics personnel responsible for these operations underwent the same security screening as the interrogators themselves, their knowledge of the facility's requirements making them potential security risks if their loyalty was ever compromised. The legal and ethical frameworks that governed interrogation operations within the Tower of Angels reflected the unique position of the Dark Angels as both imperial servants and guardians of secrets that could not be shared with other imperial agencies. The protocols established for these operations attempted to balance the need for effective intelligence gathering against the moral obligations that bound all Space Marines to protect humanity and serve the Emperor's will. The interrogator chaplains who conducted these operations were required to maintain detailed records of their methods and results, creating documentation that could be reviewed by senior chapter leadership to ensure that the techniques employed remained within acceptable bounds. The intelligence gathered through successful interrogations provided valuable insights into chaos corruption patterns and the operational methods employed by other fallen angels who remained at large throughout the galaxy. This information proved crucial for planning future hunting operations, as it revealed the psychological vulnerabilities and tactical preferences that could be exploited when attempting to capture specific targets. The intelligence also provided early warning about potential chaos cult activities and other threats that might not be detected through conventional Imperial surveillance networks, allowing the Dark Angels and their successor chapters to intervene before these threats could cause significant damage to Imperial interests. The psychological impact of working within the Tower of Angels extended beyond the immediate participants to influence the broader culture of the Dark Angels chapter, creating an atmosphere of grim determination that permeated every aspect of their operations. The knowledge that their battle brothers were conducting these interrogations served as a constant reminder of the chapter's shame, while simultaneously reinforcing their commitment to redemption through the capture and conversion of their fallen gene kin. This cultural influence affected recruitment practices, training programs, and tactical doctrines in ways that distinguished the Dark Angels from other Space Marine chapters, while maintaining their effectiveness as a military force capable of fulfilling their official duties to the Imperium. The pursuit of Cypher across the millennia stands as perhaps the most frustrating and enigmatic aspect of the Dark Angels' eternal hunt, a chase that has spanned star systems and centuries without ever achieving the decisive capture that would allow the chapter to extract the secrets locked within the mysterious warrior's mind. Unlike other fallen angels who operate from the shadows or establish themselves in remote locations, Cypher seems to deliberately court attention, appearing at pivotal moments in Imperial history with a frequency that suggests either supernatural prescience or access to intelligence networks that rival those of the Inquisition itself. His signature weapons, the ancient plasma pistol that never seems to require recharging, and the ornate bolt pistol, whose origins some claim trace back to the earliest days of the Great Crusade, have become legendary among the few Imperial agents who have survived encounters with him. The most documented encounter between Cypher and Dark Angel's forces occurred during the Siege of Vrax, where interrogator Chaplain Boreas led a strike force that had been tracking the mysterious warrior for 3 years across the Segmentum Solar. Intelligence reports suggested that Cypher had been supplying weapons to both Imperial and Chaos forces during the prolonged conflict, his actions seemingly designed to prolong the bloodshed rather than achieve any tactical objective that conventional military analysis could identify. The Dark Angel's deployment to Vrax required careful coordination with the Death Corps regiments already engaged in the siege, as their true mission could not be revealed to the Guard commanders who viewed their arrival as standard Space Marine reinforcement. Boreas established his command post within the ruins of a manufactorum complex that provided clear sight lines across the primary battlefield while remaining concealed from orbital observation. His forces included 2 full companies of battle brothers, along with specialized Ravenwing reconnaissance elements, whose bikes and land speeders could respond rapidly to confirmed sightings of their quarry. The interrogator chaplain's tactical approach emphasized patience and careful observation, recognizing that Cypher's operational patterns suggested he would eventually reveal himself when conditions suited his mysterious agenda. The breakthrough came when Ravenwing scouts detected unusual energy signatures emanating from a supposedly abandoned hive section that had been declared off-limits due to structural damage from orbital bombardment. The readings matched the distinctive electromagnetic profile of archaeotech weapons, suggesting the presence of equipment that dated back to the Dark Age of technology. Sergeant Samuel led a reconnaissance team into the ruins, their bikes modified with sound-dampening systems that allowed them to approach the target area without alerting potential sentries to their presence. The facility they discovered had been converted into a sophisticated workshop where ancient weapons were being modified and repaired using techniques that combined traditional Imperial engineering with innovations that seemed to draw upon knowledge that had been lost for millennia. The equipment present included not only standard Imperial weapons, but also Xeno's artifacts and devices whose origins could not be immediately identified. Most significantly, the workshop contained partially completed modifications to bolt pistols that matched the distinctive characteristics of Cypher's signature weapon, suggesting that the mysterious warrior was not only using ancient technology, but actively improving upon it. Cypher's escape from the Vrax facility demonstrated the supernatural abilities that had allowed him to evade capture for so many centuries, as he seemed to anticipate the Dark Angels' assault before their forces had even begun their approach. The workshop's defenses activated automatically as the strike force breached the outer perimeter, revealing automated weapon systems that fired ammunition types that had never been cataloged by Imperial technical specialists. The rounds penetrated power armor with ease, while creating electromagnetic pulses that disrupted communication systems and targeting arrays, forcing the Dark Angels to rely on basic visual coordination rather than their sophisticated tactical networks. The running battle that followed led through the Hive's lower levels, where Cypher demonstrated an intimate knowledge of the structure's layout that suggested extensive prior reconnaissance or access to architectural plans that should have been destroyed during the initial bombardment. His movement patterns defied conventional tactical doctrine, as he repeatedly placed himself in positions where capture seemed inevitable only to vanish through passages that subsequent investigation revealed to be sealed or non-existent. The pursuit continued for 18 hours before the Dark Angels were forced to acknowledge that their quarry had once again escaped their grasp. The intelligence gathered from the abandoned workshop provided valuable insights into Cypher's capabilities and objectives, though it also raised disturbing questions about the sources of his knowledge and equipment. Technical analysis revealed that the weapons modifications discovered at the site incorporated principles that were not documented in any Imperial archives, suggesting either independent innovation or access to information that had been deliberately suppressed by Imperial authorities. The most troubling discovery was evidence that Cypher had been monitoring Dark Angel's communications, his equipment including devices that could intercept and decode encrypted transmissions that were supposed to be secure against all known intelligence gathering methods. The hunt for Marier Astellan presented different challenges than the pursuit of Cypher, as the former Terran Dark Angel had established himself openly on the feudal world of Tharsis, using his knowledge of ancient Imperial military doctrine to transform the planet's primitive defense forces into a disciplined army capable of resisting Xeno's incursions. Unlike other fallen angels who concealed their identities or operated through intermediaries, Astellan had proclaimed himself a servant of the Emperor while carefully omitting any details about his chapter affiliation or the circumstances that had led to his exile from Imperial service. Captain Belial of the Deathwing received the assignment to investigate reports of an enhanced human who had been organizing resistance against Orc raiders in the Tharsis system, intelligence that suggested the possible presence of a rogue space marine or other augmented individual operating without proper authorization. The investigation required careful coordination with local Imperial authorities, as any direct action against Astellan would need to be justified through official channels if it were to avoid attracting unwanted attention from the Administratum or other Imperial agencies that monitored Space Marine activities. The initial reconnaissance revealed that Astellan had indeed transformed Tharsis into a formidable military stronghold, its population organized along lines that reflected the combined arms tactics that had characterized Imperial military doctrine during the Great Crusade. The planet's defense forces included not only conventional infantry and armor units, but also specialized formations that had been trained to coordinate with air support and orbital assets in ways that exceeded the capabilities of most planetary defense forces. The sophistication of these arrangements suggested that their organizer possessed knowledge that could only have been acquired through direct participation in major military campaigns. Belial's approach to the situation reflected the complex political and military considerations that governed Dark Angel's operations when dealing with fallen angels who had established themselves within Imperial society. Direct assault against a Stellan's position would have required significant justification to local authorities, while covert operations risked exposing the true nature of the Dark Angel's interest in the target. The solution involved establishing a monitoring presence on Tharsis, while gathering evidence that could support official action against a Stellan if circumstances required more direct intervention. The Deathwing Strike Force established their base of operations within an abandoned mining facility that provided concealment while allowing observation of a Stellan's activities and the defensive preparations he had implemented across the planet's primary continent. The facility's location also provided access to underground tunnel networks that could facilitate covert movement if circumstances required the Dark Angels to approach their target without alerting his supporters or the local population that had come to revere him as their savior. The confrontation between Belial and a Stellan occurred during a coordinated orc assault that threatened to overwhelm Tharsis's defenses despite the improvements that had been implemented over the previous decades. The fallen angel's tactical coordination of the planetary defense demonstrated capabilities that clearly exceeded those of any normal human commander, his orders revealing intimate knowledge of Space Marine combat doctrines and the specific weaknesses of orc military organization. The battle provided cover for Belial's forces to approach a Stellan's command post while simultaneously testing the former Dark Angel's loyalty through observation of his actions during the crisis. Stellan's behavior during the battle revealed the complex motivations that had driven his participation in Luther's rebellion and his subsequent attempts to find redemption through service to humanity. His tactical decisions consistently prioritized the protection of civilian populations over military objectives, even when such choices compromised the overall effectiveness of the planetary defense. The fallen warrior's willingness to sacrifice strategic advantages to save innocent lives demonstrated that his corruption had not eliminated his fundamental commitment to the Emperor's vision of human unity and protection. The intelligence extracted from a Stellan during his eventual capture provided crucial insights into the political and psychological factors that had contributed to Luther's rebellion, revealing details about the growing resentment among Calibanite Dark Angels that had been concealed from the Primarch and his inner circle. Stellan's testimony described the systematic exclusion of Caliban-born warriors from important assignments and the cultural tensions that had developed between Terran and Calibanite elements of the Legion during the later phases of the Great Crusade. His account suggested that Luther's corruption had been facilitated by genuine grievances that made his heretical arguments more persuasive to warriors who felt abandoned by their Gene Father. The revelations about loyalty and betrayal that emerged from Stellan's interrogation forced the Dark Angel's leadership to confront uncomfortable truths about their own role in creating the conditions that had enabled Luther's rebellion. The former Terran's perspective on the events leading up to Caliban's destruction differed significantly from the official narrative that had been constructed by the survivors, suggesting that the Primarch's decision to leave Luther behind had been perceived as a deliberate insult rather than a practical necessity. These insights influenced subsequent Dark Angels recruitment and training practices, as the chapter's leadership recognized the need to address potential sources of internal division before they could develop into serious threats. The hunt for Brother Sar Davil required different tactics than those employed against more prominent fallen angels, as his integration into the population of Hive Tertius had made him nearly invisible among the billions of inhabitants who crowded the massive urban complex. The former Dark Angel had spent decades establishing a legitimate identity as a mid-level administrator within the Hive's water reclamation systems, his position providing access to infrastructure networks while maintaining the anonymity necessary to avoid detection by Imperial security forces. Interrogator Chaplain Safon led the investigation into reports of unusual incidents within Hive Tertius that suggested the presence of an enhanced individual who had been intervening in criminal activities and civil disturbances with capabilities that exceeded those of normal humans. The pattern of interventions indicated someone with military training and enhanced physical capabilities, though the incidents were subtle enough that local authorities had not recognized them as evidence of Space Marine involvement in civilian affairs. The challenge of locating Davil within the Hive's massive population required innovative intelligence-gathering techniques that could identify individuals with enhanced capabilities without alerting them to the investigation. Safon's team established monitoring stations throughout the Hive's primary levels, using sensor arrays that could detect the distinctive physiological signatures associated with Space Marine augmentation, while filtering out the background noise created by the millions of normal humans who lived and worked in the area. The breakthrough came when Davil's intervention in a gang war created casualties, whose wounds indicated the use of weapons and tactics that were consistent with Space Marine combat training. The precision of the attacks and the specific targeting of gang leadership suggested someone with intimate knowledge of small unit tactics and the psychological warfare techniques that were taught to Astartes forces. The investigation of the crime scene revealed trace evidence that included genetic material consistent with Dark Angel's gene seed, confirming the presence of their target within the immediate area. Davil's capture required careful planning that could isolate him from the civilian population while preventing any possibility of collateral damage that might reveal the true nature of the operation to local authorities. Safon's team used the Hive's infrastructure systems to create a controlled emergency that forced the evacuation of the target area, providing cover for a surgical strike that could extract Davil without alerting other inhabitants to the presence of Space Marine forces within their community. The psychological profile that emerged from Davil's interrogation revealed the profound guilt and self-doubt that had driven many fallen angels to seek anonymity within Imperial society, rather than embracing the corruption that had claimed their more prominent brothers. His testimony described the gradual erosion of morale among Caliban's garrison forces as they watched their battle brothers earn glory in distant campaigns, while they remained confined to training duties that seemed increasingly meaningless. The fallen warrior's account provided insights into the recruitment and indoctrination techniques that Luther had employed to build support for his rebellion among warriors who had initially remained loyal to the Primarch and the Emperor. The collateral damage caused by Dark Angel's hunting operations became increasingly problematic as the centuries passed, and their pursuit of the fallen angels led them into conflicts with other Imperial forces and civilian populations who could not understand the true nature of their mission. The chapter's reputation for sudden departures from active battlefields and their tendency to prioritize mysterious objectives over conventional military goals created tensions with Guard commanders and other Space Marine forces who found their own operations compromised by Dark Angel's actions. The Cimmerian incident exemplified the kind of political complications that could arise when Dark Angel's hunting operations intersected with broader Imperial military campaigns, as Captain Azrael's pursuit of a confirmed fallen angel sighting led to the abandonment of a critical defensive position during a major chaos incursion. The withdrawal of Dark Angel's forces at a crucial moment in the battle resulted in the collapse of an entire sector of the Imperial defense line, allowing Chaos forces to advance deeper into Imperial territory and threatening the evacuation of several million civilians from the path of the enemy advance. The investigation that followed the Cimmerian disaster revealed the extent to which Dark Angel's operational priorities had diverged from standard Imperial military doctrine, as their pursuit of individual fallen angels sometimes took precedence over strategic objectives that affected the broader war effort. The chapter's leadership was forced to develop new protocols that balanced their hunting mission against their responsibilities as a Space Marine force, creating guidelines that could prevent similar incidents while maintaining their effectiveness in pursuing their fallen brothers. The long-term impact of these hunting operations on Imperial worlds and civilian populations created a legacy of suspicion and resentment that complicated Dark Angel's relationships with other Imperial organizations. Planetary governors who had experienced the sudden departure of Dark Angel's forces during critical battles were reluctant to request their assistance in future crises, while Guard commanders developed contingency plans that assumed Space Marine support might be withdrawn without warning. These political complications forced the chapter to invest significant resources in maintaining relationships with Imperial authorities while concealing the true reasons for their operational patterns. The psychological toll of the Eternal Hunt began manifesting in various forms of combat fatigue and spiritual exhaustion among Dark Angel's forces, as warriors who had dedicated their entire careers to pursuing their fallen brothers questioned whether their mission could ever be completed successfully. The knowledge that new fallen angels continued to appear across the galaxy despite centuries of hunting operations created doubts about the effectiveness of their methods and the possibility of ever achieving true redemption for their chapter's shame. These concerns influenced recruitment practices and training programs as the chapter's leadership sought to identify and address potential sources of demoralization before they could compromise operational effectiveness. The moral compromises that have defined the Dark Angel's existence for 10 millennia represent a gradual erosion of the very principles they were created to uphold. Each decision to prioritize their secret hunt over their sworn duties, creating precedents that have fundamentally altered their relationship with the Imperium they serve. The chapter's willingness to abandon Imperial allies at critical moments has created a pattern of behavior that violates the most basic tenets of Space Marine doctrine, transforming warriors who should embody absolute loyalty into forces whose reliability cannot be guaranteed when their hidden agenda conflicts with broader Imperial objectives. These compromises began as desperate measures to prevent the revelation of their shame, but have evolved into systematic practices that prioritize chapter interests over the welfare of the Imperium's citizens and military forces. The abandonment of the Medusa 5 campaign exemplified the devastating consequences of these moral compromises, as Supreme Grand Master Azrael ordered the immediate withdrawal of 3 full companies when Ravenwing scouts reported a confirmed cipher sighting in a neighboring sector. The Dark Angel's forces had been holding a critical choke point that prevented Chaos forces from advancing toward evacuation zones where millions of Imperial civilians were being loaded onto transport vessels. Their sudden departure created a gap in the defensive line that Chaos commanders exploited within hours, resulting in the massacre of entire refugee columns and the capture of strategic positions that had taken weeks of bloody fighting to secure. The justifications offered to Imperial command for this withdrawal relied on fabricated intelligence reports about urgent threats that required immediate Dark Angel's intervention, deceptions that became increasingly elaborate as questions arose about the chapter's tactical priorities. The administrative burden of maintaining these false narratives required dedicated personnel who specialized in creating plausible cover stories while ensuring that official records supported the chapter's version of events. The psychological impact on Dark Angel's warriors who participated in these deceptions created additional stress that compounded the existing burden of maintaining their terrible secrets. The pattern of strategic abandonment extended beyond individual battles to encompass entire campaign theaters, where Dark Angel's forces would establish strong positions before departing without explanation when hunting opportunities arose elsewhere. The Armageddon Steel Legion's 47th Armored Regiment found themselves without promised Space Marine support during a critical phase of their advance against Orc positions, forcing them to assault heavily fortified positions with conventional forces that suffered catastrophic casualties. The regimental commanders' after-action reports documented the specific tactical consequences of the Dark Angel's departure, creating official records that contradicted the chapter's claims about their deployment priorities. The cumulative effect of these abandonments has created a reputation that precedes Dark Angel's forces throughout Imperial military circles, with commanders who have experienced their sudden departures sharing warnings about the chapter's unreliability with colleagues who might otherwise welcome Space Marine reinforcement. Guard generals have developed contingency plans that assume Dark Angel's support will be withdrawn without warning, while other Space Marine chapters have expressed concerns about coordinating operations with forces whose commitment to shared objectives cannot be guaranteed. These professional relationships, built over centuries of cooperation, have been systematically damaged by the Dark Angel's pursuit of their hidden agenda. The tension between the chapter's duty to the Imperium and their secret mission of redemption has created internal conflicts that affect every level of their organization, from individual battle brothers struggling with divided loyalties to strategic planning sessions where official objectives compete with hunting priorities. Company captains find themselves forced to choose between tactical opportunities that could achieve significant victories for Imperial forces and intelligence leads that might bring them closer to capturing their fallen brothers. These decisions create psychological stress that manifests in various forms of combat fatigue and spiritual exhaustion among warriors who join the chapter, expecting to serve the Emperor's will without reservation. The compartmentalization of knowledge within the inner circle has created additional tensions as warriors at different levels of initiation receive conflicting information about their chapter's priorities and objectives. Battle brothers who have not been inducted into the deeper mysteries cannot understand why their commanders make tactical decisions that seem to contradict established Space Marine doctrine, creating confusion and resentment that undermines unit cohesion. The careful management of information flow required to maintain these deceptions consumes significant administrative resources while creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemies who understand the chapter's internal dynamics. The psychological burden of maintaining dual loyalties has proven particularly difficult for chaplains and other spiritual leaders within the chapter, as they must provide guidance to warriors while concealing the fundamental conflicts that drive their organization's behavior. The traditional role of Space Marine chaplains as moral anchors and spiritual guides becomes compromised when their own actions contradict the principles they are supposed to uphold. The development of specialized counseling techniques for managing these conflicts has created new forms of spiritual discipline that diverge significantly from standard Imperial religious practices. The recruitment and training modifications implemented to address these tensions have gradually altered the character of new Dark Angels in ways that distinguish them from warriors produced by other chapters. Aspirants undergo psychological conditioning designed to prepare them for the possibility of divided loyalties while maintaining their effectiveness as military units. The selection criteria emphasize mental flexibility and the ability to function effectively despite incomplete information about their mission parameters. These changes have created warriors who are more adaptable to complex operational environments, but potentially less committed to absolute principles than their predecessors. The potential consequences if the Dark Angel's secret were ever fully revealed to the Imperium represent an existential threat that extends far beyond the chapter itself, as the knowledge that nearly half of the First Legion turned traitor would undermine confidence in the genetic stability and loyalty of all Space Marine forces. The Imperium's military doctrine relies heavily on the assumption that Space Marines represent the ultimate expression of human loyalty and dedication to the Emperor's will. The revelation that such elite warriors could be corrupted on such a massive scale would create doubts about the reliability of all Astartes forces that could cascade through Imperial command structures and civilian populations. The High Lords of Terra would face impossible choices about how to respond to such revelations, as the Dark Angels and their successor chapters represent significant military assets that cannot be easily replaced. The Unforgiven chapters collectively control dozens of worlds and maintain recruitment networks that produce thousands of new Space Marines each generation. The loss of these forces would create strategic vulnerabilities that enemies of the Imperium would be quick to exploit, particularly in sectors where Dark Angel's forces currently provide the primary defense against chaos incursions and Xenos threats. The Inquisition's response to the full revelation of the Dark Angel's secret would likely involve comprehensive investigations of all Unforgiven chapters and their associated personnel, creating massive disruptions to Imperial military operations across multiple sectors. The resources required for such investigations would strain the Inquisition's capabilities while potentially compromising ongoing operations against other threats. The political implications of discovering that multiple Space Marine chapters had been operating under false pretenses for millennia would create scandals that could destabilize Imperial governance at the highest levels. The precedent established by the Dark Angel's deception would raise questions about the reliability of other Space Marine chapters and the effectiveness of Imperial oversight mechanisms designed to prevent such systematic concealment of critical information. The discovery that the Unforgiven had maintained their secret for 10,000 years would demonstrate failures in Imperial intelligence gathering and administrative supervision that could encourage other organizations to attempt similar deceptions. The erosion of trust between different Imperial institutions could create coordination problems that would persist for generations. The civilian populations of worlds protected by Dark Angel's forces would face uncertain futures if their defenders were declared traitor or subjected to extensive purges that reduced their military effectiveness. Many of these worlds have developed economic and social structures that depend on the stability provided by Space Marine protection, their industries and trade networks organized around the assumption that Astartes forces will continue to provide security against external threats. The disruption of these arrangements could create humanitarian crises that would require massive Imperial intervention to address. The strategic implications extend beyond immediate military considerations to encompass the broader balance of power within the galaxy, as the removal or significant weakening of Dark Angel's forces would create opportunities for enemies who have been contained by their presence. Chaos cults that have been suppressed by Unforgiven operations could emerge from hiding to threaten worlds that lack adequate defenses, while Xenos empires might expand into territories that have been protected by Dark Angel's patrol routes. The cumulative effect of these security gaps could destabilize entire sectors and create cascading crises that would overwhelm Imperial response capabilities. The technological secrets maintained by the Dark Angels, including their specialized equipment for hunting fallen angels and the advanced systems installed within the rock, would become subjects of intense scrutiny that could reveal capabilities and knowledge that the chapter has carefully guarded for millennia. The distribution of this technology to other Imperial forces might provide short-term benefits, but would also eliminate the tactical advantages that have made the Dark Angels effective in their unique mission. The loss of these advantages could compromise ongoing hunting operations and allow remaining fallen angels to escape capture more easily. Speculation about the future of the hunt reveals the fundamental impossibility of achieving complete success through current methods, as the scattered nature of the fallen angels and their integration into various aspects of Imperial society makes comprehensive identification and capture virtually impossible. The temporal displacement effects that accompanied Caliban's destruction mean that new fallen angels continue to appear in the present day despite the passage of millennia, creating a perpetual cycle of hunting that cannot be broken through conventional military operations. The chapter's leadership has begun acknowledging privately that their mission may continue indefinitely, transforming from a temporary crisis response into a permanent aspect of their identity. The psychological impact of this realization has created new forms of spiritual crisis within the chapter, as warriors who dedicated their lives to achieving redemption confront the possibility that their efforts may never succeed completely. The traditional Dark Angel's emphasis on duty and perseverance provides some protection against despair, but the cumulative effect of centuries of hunting without decisive victory has created doubts about the fundamental assumptions that drive their mission. Some members of the inner circle have begun questioning whether the pursuit of perfect redemption is worth the moral compromises it requires, though such doubts are carefully concealed from the broader chapter membership. The evolution of fallen angels themselves presents additional challenges for future hunting operations, as those who have survived for millennia have developed sophisticated methods for avoiding detection and capture. The most dangerous specimens have learned to exploit the Dark Angel's predictable responses to confirmed sightings, using their knowledge of chapter tactics to create traps and ambushes that target hunting forces. The arms race between hunters and quarry has escalated over time, with both sides developing new capabilities and techniques that make each encounter more dangerous and unpredictable. The emergence of new generations of Dark Angels who have known only the hunt creates cultural changes that may fundamentally alter the chapter's character over time. Warriors who have never experienced the kind of straightforward military campaigns that characterize the Great Crusade approach their duties with different expectations and priorities than their predecessors. The gradual shift from viewing the hunt as a temporary crisis to accepting it as a permanent mission has created new forms of chapter identity that may persist even if the original objectives are eventually achieved. The relationship between the Dark Angels and their Primarch, should Lion El'Jonson ever awaken from his deathless slumber within the rock, represents perhaps the greatest uncertainty facing the chapter's future. The Primarch's reaction to learning about 10 millennia of moral compromises and strategic deceptions conducted in his name could range from approval of their dedication to horror at their methods. The possibility that he might reject the path his sons have chosen creates existential anxiety among the chapter leadership that influences their decision-making processes in subtle but significant ways. The ultimate question of whether the Dark Angels can ever truly find redemption for their ancient shame may depend less on their success in capturing the remaining fallen angels than on their willingness to confront the moral compromises they have made in pursuit of that goal. The chapter's path to redemption may require acknowledging their failures and accepting responsibility for the consequences of their choices, a form of spiritual honesty that would be far more difficult than any military victory they might achieve. The price of their hidden shame has grown beyond the original betrayal on Caliban to encompass millennia of deception and abandonment that have created new forms of guilt requiring their own redemption. As the Dark Angels continue their eternal hunt across the galaxy's battlefields, they remain trapped by the very secrecy that they believed would protect them, their shame multiplying with each moral compromise, while the possibility of true redemption grows ever more distant. The chapter that once stood as the Emperor's first and most trusted legion has become a shadow of its former glory, its warriors bound by chains of guilt and deception that grow heavier with each passing century. Whether they will ever break free from this cycle of shame and find the redemption they seek remains one of the great unanswered questions in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the hope of absolution burns ever dimmer in the endless night.